The dog barked once at 3:10, then stopped. Nobody in that valley slept through what came after. Fire on the east wall of the storehouse, kerosene under the smoke, and a rider already 200 yards up the road at a hard gallop, throwing no shadow at all because the shadow was behind him. Somebody had known exactly which building. Somebody had known exactly which corner. A woman came out of that kitchen door barefoot in her nightdress and did not go toward the water trough. She went the other way, straight at the doorway with the roof already lit, because there was a cedar trunk against the far wall with her mother's dress folded inside it, and beneath the dress, a book. A man got a hand on her arm. She went through it like a wire fence. The heat took the air out of her lungs at the threshold. 90 seconds of ceiling left, and she went in anyway. The laughter started at the far end of the row and traveled down it like fire, finding dry grass, and Hannah Mercer did not look away. 40 people. A market morning in Dry Fork, Arizona Territory, July of 1881, and 40 people learning at the same instant that it was safe to laugh. A silk glove pointed at her sleeve, at the seam, at the darker square of cotton she had set there herself, with a needle and a lamp and 14 hours of work already behind her. She kept her chin level. Because she had mended that dress, because nobody in that road had earned the right to be sorry for her, because her mother had told her once, in a room with a low fire and a hard winter pressing on the window glass, that the strongest thing a person could do in front of cruelty was refuse to perform for it. What she did not know, what none of them knew, was that a man was standing 20 steps back in the shade of a fence post, with a leather coat folded over his arm, and that he had heard every word, and that he had already decided. Would you treat them with kindness? 3 months from that morning, the woman in the silk gloves would stand in that same road and say a sentence out loud that the whole town would hear. The man who owned the note on Hannah's father's land would leave the town hall in irons on the courthouse steps with 100 people watching. 160 acres along the East Creek would come back to a dead man's name in a federal record book. And the man with the coat had not put a coat over anyone's shoulders in 8 years. None of that had happened yet. At 4 in the morning it was only dark, and it was only Hannah, and it was only bread. She worked in the rented room above the feed store, with the stovepipe ticking and the shutters closed against nothing. 6 loaves. She had built the fire at 3:30, because the flour wanted a slow oven and a slow oven wanted patience, and patience was the one thing she had never run short of. Her hands knew the dough. Would you treat them with kindness? Her mother had taught her the folding, and her mother's mother had taught it before that, and there was something steady in carrying a line forward even when every other line in her life had frayed to nothing. Cassie slept in the corner on a straw tick, with one boot still on her foot. 22 years old, and she slept like a dropped saddle, hair black and loose across the ticking. Her brown dress hung on a nail by the door, and even in the dark you could see what it was. Patched and patched again, until the patches had patches. 3 shades of brown fighting each other across the skirt. A strip of gray flannel down one side where nothing else had been left in the scrap tin. Cassie wore it the way another woman might wear a challenge. Hannah pressed the dough down and turned it, and pressed again. The blue dress lay across the chair back. She had washed it Thursday and pressed it last night with the flat iron, heated on the stove. And it was, if a person wanted to be honest about it, the only garment she owned that could be carried into a public road without apology. She knew every repair on it, the way a clerk knows a ledger. The darker square at the left elbow, put there the 3rd winter after her father died, when she had run out of blue cloth and taken the square from the lining of a coat that no longer had a wearer. The hem let down, then taken up, then let down again, as her circumstances shifted and shifted back. Would you treat them with kindness? And along the right 4 inches of cream-colored thread because she had run out of blue thread on a Tuesday in November, and the store had wanted 11 cents for a spool, and 11 cents that week had been the difference between flour and no flour. She had chosen the flour. The stitching had stayed. She got the loaves in, and set the damper, and stood at the little cracked mirror over the wash basin, and pinned her hair back, and looked at herself in the bad light. Hold your head up. her own voice low enough not to wake her sister, and the woman in the glass looked back with the flat expression of somebody who had said it before and meant it every time. Cassie stirred at 5, sat up, squinted at the stove, at the window, at her sister already dressed and already flowered to the wrist. Her voice came out sanded down by sleep. "Don't go today." Hannah didn't turn around. "I have bread to sell." "You have bread to sell every Saturday." Cassie got the other boot on. "Today's the day Mrs. Ashcroft comes back from Tucson. Then she can eat too." Which ended it, because Cassie knew better than to push a wall. But she stood there pulling her braid together, and she watched her sister's back, and she thought a thing she did not say, which was that walls do not know they are walls. Which was that a person can stand straight for 6 years and never once notice how much of her is holding. The walk was 1.5 miles of packed road and a fine floating dust that got into everything. Sorrel the mule came along on a lead rope, because Sorrel would carry the empty basket home, and because Sorrel, at 19 years of age, had a way of looking at the world that Hannah found restful. The sun came up over the pinaleños and turned them the color of a struck match. Dry Fork held 340 souls, and most of them had lived inside a mile of each other for 20 years, which meant they knew each other's debts, each other's failures, each other's soft spots and where to press. For the Mercer girls, being known had never once been a kindness. Their father had come out from Tennessee after the war, with a wagon and a plow and a notion about water. Amos Mercer. He had found the creek and filed on the East Strip and built a house on it with his own arms. And he had married a Chiricahua woman named Delia, who had been born in that valley when the valley did not yet answer to anybody's map. And the two of them had raised 2 daughters and paid 19 years of territorial tax on 160 acres of grass and gravel and cottonwood shade. Then the pneumonia. 3 weeks in a January, and Hannah 19 years old, sitting 19 days beside that bed. Then the spring, then the man. Hannah did not let herself walk that road in her head. Not on a market morning. She had learned to put things in a box and set the box high and not reach for it before the work was done. Cassie walked on the mule's side, one hand on Sorrel's neck. "You're doing the thing." "What thing?" "The jaw thing." Cassie made a face, imitating it badly. "You do it when you're thinking about him." "I'm thinking about the oven." "You are thinking about the oven the way a preacher thinks about the offering plate." Hannah's mouth twitched despite herself, and she hated that it did, because she had a road to walk and a basket to keep level and a full day in front of her. The market filled by 7. Tables and wagon beds laid out down both sides of the main road. Bolts of calico. Harness leather from the tanner 2 towns east. Tin goods and dried goods and jars of put-up peaches gone soft with the heat. Somebody down past the smithy had a fiddle out and was sawing at it with more cheer than skill. Men in dusty hats leaned on wagon wheels and priced each other's stock with their eyes. Hannah took the end of the row. Table 7. Last table. Worst light. Hardest to see from the street. Because the middle spots cost money and money was a thing she counted in half-pennies. She laid out the 6 loaves on clean cloth and squared the corners of the cloth, which mattered to nobody but her, and stood behind them the way her father had taught her to stand behind a thing you made. Straight, not eager. A thing that is good does not need to beg. She sold 2 in the first hour. A young woman just down off a freight wagon, reins still in a fist, who bought a loaf and counted the coins out, and never once let her eyes travel from Hannah's face to Hannah's sleeve. Hannah felt that more than the woman would ever know, it sat in her chest for an hour afterward, like a swallow of warm coffee. Then an old man in a hat gone shapeless with sweat and time, who tipped it and called her Miss Mercer with real courtesy and asked after her sister's horses. So it was, for 1 hour, an ordinary Saturday. Then the row went quiet in a small way. Not a silence. A dip. The way a fiddle drops a half tone when a string gives. Cassie saw him first. Silas Thorne came down the middle of the road, with the crowd opening around him and closing behind him and nobody quite looking at him directly. 61 years old. Black frock coat buttoned in July, because a man who does not sweat is telling you something about himself. Low-crowned hat with a flat brim. A watch chain across the vest, heavy gold swinging with the walk. Town shoes in a road full of boots. He was not a large man. He had never needed to be. He stopped at table 7, which was not on his way to anywhere. He looked at the bread. He looked at the cloth under the bread. Then he looked up and took Hannah in with the mild, patient attention of a man appraising a horse he does not intend to buy. "You're Amos Mercer's daughter." Hannah's hands stayed flat on the table. "I am." He was a decent man. Thorne let that sit, gave it room. Let the people at the next table over hear it settle. Debt isn't decent, but he was. Something went cold and clean through Hannah's middle. Not rage. Rage was loud and rage was useful for about 4 seconds, and then it cost you everything. This was quieter. Would you treat them with kindness? This was the specific temperature of standing across a plank table from the man who had taken your father's ground and hearing him praise your father's character in a voice pitched for an audience. She said nothing, which was, she knew, exactly what he wanted and exactly what she owed him. Thorne reached into his vest, took out a coin, set it on the boards beside the loaves with a small, deliberate click. He did not take bread. He touched the brim of his hat and went on down the row, and the crowd closed after him, and the fiddle picked back up somewhere past the smithy. Cassie was already moving. Hannah caught her wrist without looking. "Let go of me." "No." "He put money on your table like you were a hat on the ground." "I know what he did." Cassie's arm was shaking under Hannah's fingers. "Then let me throw it at him." "He wants you to throw it." Hannah's voice had gone very level, the way it went when she was holding something with both hands. 40 people just watched him be gracious to a poor woman. If you throw it, 40 people watch a wild girl throw money at a gentleman in the street. Which story do you think they'd tell tonight? Cassie pulled her arm free, but she stayed. Hannah picked up the coin, turned it once. It was a silver dollar, a real one, more than she would clear on the whole morning. She put it in her pocket. Because a thing you keep is a thing you can hand back later. Because there is a kind of patience that looks exactly like defeat right up until the day it doesn't. She would carry that dollar for 3 months. The Ashcroft party came down the row at 9:30. Vivian Ashcroft, 51 years old, wife of the man who owned the biggest general store in Dry Fork and 3 more in towns to the east. Cream-colored summer lawn with lace at the throat. A straw hat with cloth roses. A parasol she did not need in that light and carried anyway, because a parasol says the sun is a thing that happens to other people. And the gloves. Silk. Pearl buttons at the wrist. Harriet Pike walked at her left, 44, the bank manager's wife, dressed 1 careful notch below Vivian in a way that had taken her years to calibrate. A third woman on the right whose name Hannah did not know and would never learn. Vivian was not looking at Hannah. She was talking. Something about her sister's house in Tucson, about a hired girl who had proved unsatisfactory, about the heat down there being a different kind of heat than the heat up here. She stopped at the end table because the end table had bread on it. Her eyes went to the loaves. Then, naturally, the way eyes do, from the loaves to the hands that had made them, then up the arm, to the sleeve. She stopped talking. Harriet Pike noticed where she had stopped. Then Harriet was looking too. Then the third woman. Hannah felt it arrive. There is a particular weight to being looked at by people who have decided you are a topic. She kept her face still. That was a skill. She had built it over 6 years the way you build a callus, layer by layer from being handled. She did not look down. She met Vivian Ashcroft's eyes and held them, which was, in that road in that year, a small act of trespass. Vivian's chin came up a 1/4 inch. Is that meant to be a dress? She did not say it to Hannah. She said it, the way people say things they want the whole street to hear, while pretending they are speaking to one companion. And the pretending is the cruelty, because the pretending means you are not even worth addressing. Harriet Pike had her line ready. You could hear that it was ready. It looks like something a person might line a chicken coop with. The third woman laughed out loud, and then it went. 4 people, then 9, then the row. Not everyone. There were men with kindness. There were men at the next tables who kept their eyes on their own goods and their mouths shut, And there was the old man with the shapeless hat, who turned all the way around and walked off toward the smithy rather than stand in it. But enough. Would you treat them with kindness? Enough that it pressed on Hannah from 3 directions at once, and enough that she understood the arithmetic of it, which is that public cruelty draws a crowd on purpose, because the crowd is the point, because the more faces that turn, the smaller the person in the center is meant to become. Cassie stepped up beside her sister, 22 years old, in a dress that had more thread than cloth, boots to the knee, her braid coming apart, and her voice came out of her clear enough to carry. Say it again. Louder. There's folks at the end of the road didn't catch it. The row rippled. Vivian Ashcroft took half a step back, then found her feet, because she had been rich a long time, and rich a long time teaches you how to recover. Her mouth curved. This one's wilder than her sister. Wild. Everybody in that road knew what the word was doing. It had 2 syllables and about 9 meanings, and every one of them was a door being closed. The laughter changed. It got a different edge under it, thinner, meaner, and Hannah heard the change and understood that they were no longer laughing at a garment. She pressed her hand flat on the table, hard, palm down on the sun-warmed boards. Would you treat them with kindness? Because something had to take the weight of it, all of it, the laughing and the looking and the practiced carrying loudness of a woman who had rehearsed a sentence in a Tucson parlor and saved it for a market road. And Hannah had decided a long time ago that whatever took the weight, it would not be her face. She spoke into it, not loud, level. I sewed it myself. The row didn't quiet. Not yet. I found that most of the work worth anything in this world doesn't come out of a store. Vivian's eyebrow went up. It was the expression she kept for the moment a person beneath her produced a complete sentence. She repeated the word like she was holding it with tongs. Work. Yes. Hannah did not blink. Work. There was a small silence, 3 seconds of it, and Harriet Pike filled it with a practiced smile and a practiced line. Well, it certainly shows. More laughter. Hannah looped the basket handle over her arm. She was going to leave, not because she was ashamed. She told herself that with great care, and it was almost entirely true, because staying gave them more of what they had come for. Because a person can absorb a certain amount, and then the absorbing itself becomes a performance, and she would not perform. She got the basket up, and the road went quiet. Not the dip, not the ripple, the other kind. The kind that falls on a crowd when something has shifted, when someone has come into a space, and the pressure in the air has changed, when 40 people stop at once without being told to. Hannah looked up. He was standing 20 steps back in the shade of a fence post, and he had been there long enough to have heard all of it. She knew who he was the way everyone in Dry Fork knew who he was. At a distance mostly. Gideon Ward came to town when he needed goods, and conducted his business without lingering and went back up the valley road, and he had been doing that for 7 years. And in 7 years he had bought hard ground above the flats and built the twin post outfit out of almost nothing into a thing other ranchers spoke about in a tone that was equal parts respect and discomfort. 39 years old, tall in the way you notice, before you notice anything else, and broad through the shoulders with the particular build of a man who has done physical work his whole life and has not stopped doing it. A wide-brimmed felt hat gone the color of the road, pushed a little back off his forehead. A cowhide vest over a cotton shirt, buttoned to the throat with no tie. Canvas trousers down into boots that had been resoled twice. The leather coat was folded over his left forearm. He had taken it off coming out of the bank an hour ago, because it was July. He did not look angry. That was the thing Hannah noticed and could not place. His face did not do much of anything, but his eyes were moving. Slow, deliberate. Vivian Ashcroft. Then Harriet Pike. Then the third woman. Then out across the faces of the people who had laughed, one at a time, unhurried, the way a man counts head in a corral. The laughter died before he took a single step. Then he came. Not fast. Not with any kind of show. He walked the way he did everything, which was like a man who had settled the question already and was now simply carrying it out. He stopped beside her. He shook the coat out with one hand and put it around her shoulders. He did it the way you would settle a coat around somebody you had known for years. No flourish. No pause for effect. The weight of it came down on her, and it smelled of wood smoke and horse and old leather, and it was far too warm, and Hannah's throat did something she had no permission for. Then he turned and looked at Vivian Ashcroft. Anybody who laughs at somebody working honest has forgot what respect looks like. His voice did not rise. That was the whole of it. It was not sharp. It was not the performance of a temper. It did not ask the road to agree with it. It was a statement, flat and finished, with no seam in it for a person to get a fingernail under. Vivian's mouth opened, closed. He waited. With the patience of a man who could outlast weather, she said nothing. And every person in that road watched her say nothing. And that was worse for her than any answer would have been. And she knew it. And Hannah watched her know it. Gideon turned to Hannah. "Ma'am, you got more bread to sell?" Hannah stared at him. She was aware, in some distant back room of herself, that her heart was doing something irregular and unhelpful. She was aware that half the market was watching. She was aware of the coat. 4 loaves. "I'll take them. For the hands." He reached into his trouser pocket and set money on the boards. He did not count it out with any ceremony. He just put down what it was worth and a little past what it was worth, the way an honest man does when he has decided the matter and does not wish to discuss it. Hannah looked at the coins. Looked at him. "That's too much." "No, it isn't." She had spent 6 years learning exactly what a thing was worth to the half-cent. She knew he had overpaid, and she knew that arguing about it in front of half the town would accomplish nothing except to hand the row a new spectacle, and she had already given them one. She wrapped the 4 loaves in the cloth. Cassie, from the side. "Dry as a creek bed in June. You want the mule too?" He's getting looked at. Something happened at the corner of Gideon Ward's mouth. It was not a smile. It was in the same county as one. He took the package. He nodded to Hannah, a small courteous tip of the chin, and he walked away toward the wagons. The market noise came back gradually. Not all at once, and not without a certain self-consciousness that had not been in it before. A whole road full of people finding sudden interest in their own goods. Vivian Ashcroft left with her companions and bought nothing from anybody. Harriet Pike said something short and low into her ear as they went. Hannah did not try to hear it. Cassie watched them the whole way down the row, and then she said, without turning her head, "Did you see it?" "See what?" He looked at Thorne first. Cassie's voice had dropped, and the mockery had gone out of it entirely. Before he ever looked at those women, he came around that fence post, and the first thing his eyes found was Silas Thorne going up the other side of the road. Hannah stood with a coat on her shoulders in July and did not know what to do with that. She kept it on for 10 minutes. It made no sense by any practical measure. The sun was straight up. The boards were hot enough to feel through her boots. And she was standing in a market road in an ankle-length cotton dress, with a man's heavy hide coat over the top of it like a woman waiting for a norther. She kept it on anyway. Then she folded it carefully over her arm and went to find him. He was at the end of the row where the wagons were tied, talking to a man she took for one of his hands, a squat weathered fellow with gray in his mustache, and the conversation ended when she came up. She held the coat out. "Thank you. I can't keep it." He took it. He did not argue about it, which she noted, because most men would have, and most men would have enjoyed it. "What's your name?" "Hannah Mercer." She kept her eyes on his. "I know who you are, figured." He settled the coat back over his arm. "Would you treat them with kindness?" Looked past her at the road for a second, at the dust and the wagons and the people going about their business. And then he said the next thing the way a man says a thing he has been arranging in his head and has just finished arranging. "I need somebody to run the kitchen out at my place. Steady wages. Room if you want it." Hannah's spine went straight, because she had been offered things before. 6 years of being offered things. Blankets after her mother died. A basket at Christmas with kindness. A kiss from the church women with everyone watching her take it. A position as a girl in a household where the lady of the house had a particular light in her eye that said she wanted to feel a certain way about herself, and Hannah was the material. She had refused everyone. "I don't take charity, Mr. Ward." "Good." He did not even pause. "I'm not handing out any." And then he told her the truth, which she had not expected. and which changed the shape of the whole morning. Woman who kept my kitchen before was Mrs. Coyle. She left me last month. He was looking at the wagons, not at her. Not over money. Somebody rode out to her place at night and told her it wasn't wise to work for me. That landed in Hannah's chest like a stone dropped in a well. Who? Can't prove it. He turned his head then and looked at her, so I don't say the name. The market noise went on around them, the fiddle and the wagon chains and somebody's dog. I need somebody who won't run, Gideon said. I just watched you stand in front of 40 people and not move a foot. That's not pity. That's hiring. Hannah did not answer right away. Because something in her was fighting. Because she had built 6 years of walls, out of exactly this, out of refusing, out of not needing. And here was a man handing her the one version of the offer that her walls had no shape for, because he had not said, poor thing. He had not said, let me help you. He had said, I have a problem, and you are the answer to it, which is the only sentence in the English language that a proud person can accept. She thought about the room above the feed store. She thought about the winter coming and the 11 cents for the spool of thread. She thought about Cassie, 22, sleeping with one boot on, breaking other people's horses for $2 a head, and getting cheated on half of them. I have terms. That caught him. She saw it catch him. His eyebrows moved about 1/8 of an inch. Say them. Fair wages paid the first of every month, in full, no deductions for small things a man decides on the day. She counted them off flat, one after another, the way her father used to read out a bill of sale. A room with a door that locks. Sunday afternoons are mine and nobody's business, and my sister comes with me. Doing what? Horses. Not the kitchen. She's no good in a kitchen and she'd be wasted in one. Hannah's chin came up. Paid separate. Her wage is hers, not part of mine. Done. Hannah blinked. You haven't asked how good she is. I watched her walk that mule through a crowd of 40 people at a full boil and never let him spook. He shifted the coat on his arm. I know enough. And there was one more. Last thing. Her voice did not change, but something under it did. I earn my place or I leave it. I'm not a favor. If the day comes you're keeping me on because you feel some way about how I got here, tell me and I'll go that afternoon. He looked at her for a long moment, agreed. Simple as that. No speech about it. No assurance that of course he would never. No soft word to smooth it over. Just the word. And the word had weight because he had not spent any of the morning being generous with words. You can start Monday if that suits. I'll need the week. I have to settle the room and give notice. Take the week. He picked up the wrapped loaves from where he had set them on the wagon board, checked the twine, and swung up onto the seat, gathered the lines. The near horse shifted and he settled it with 2 inches of rain and no sound at all. Then he looked down at her. Miss Mercer. She looked up. That stitching on your shoulder. The cream-colored thread. He was not smiling and he was not being kind, and that was what made it land. My mother used to say, the men's a person makes tell you more about them than the whole garment ever did. He clicked to the team and the wagon rolled. Hannah stood in the settling dust of the wheel tracks and held very still for a moment, because her chest had done something entirely unauthorized, and she needed a second to determine what it was and file it somewhere it would not cause trouble. Cassie came up beside her with Sorrel on the lead. Well, don't. I didn't say anything. You were building up to it. Cassie hooked the lead rope over her shoulder and looked off down the road where the wagon was already small. I was going to say we've got a job. Both of us. Which is more than we had at 4 this morning. She let a beat go by. And then I was going to say something about the coat. Cassie. But I won't. She did, 3 times before they got home. The week went the way weeks go when a person is waiting on something. Slow at first and then all at once. Hannah settled with the man who owned the feed store, who counted her rent to the day, and then at the door, said in an awkward rush that she had been the quietest tenant he ever had, and he was sorry to lose her, which was not nothing, and which she carried out into the street with her. She gave notice to the 3 families whose mending she took in. 2 paid her fare. The third, a woman on Church Street, discovered on the final settlement that she had somehow been overcharged all year and could only manage half. Hannah took the half without comment. Because arguing over $1.40 with a woman who intends to keep it is a way of spending an afternoon and nothing else. She walked Dry Fork on the Thursday. Not for any errand. She went down past the assay office and the smithy and the church and the corral behind the livery, and she looked at all of it the way you look at a thing you suspect is about to become a memory. She saw Vivian Ashcroft twice. The first time, on the boardwalk outside the milliner's, Vivian looked straight through her as though she were a pane of glass with nothing behind it. The second time was outside the general store, unavoidably close, and Vivian's eyes came up and met hers for about a second and a half, and something moved in the woman's face. Not an apology. Hannah was not expecting an apology and would not have known what to do with one. But something. Then they were past each other, and the moment was gone, and Hannah kept walking with her basket on her arm. On Saturday night she and Cassie packed, which took them under an hour because there was not much, and because most of what there was fit in one trunk. The trunk had been their mother's. Cedar iron banded, with a broken hasp that had been repaired with wire in 1868 and had held ever since. It had come out from Tennessee in a wagon bed, and then it had sat in 4 different rooms, and now it was going to sit in a 5th. Cassie knelt and started handing things up. The cast iron pot, the sewing kit in its tin, 2 spoons, 1 bone-handled and 1 knot, a hair comb, a bundle of letters tied with kitchen twine, their father's hand on the outside of everyone, addressed to a woman he had not yet married, a promissory note signed in Tucson in 1869 for the purchase of a bull, folded into thirds, the creases gone soft as cloth, and the ledger. Hannah took it out of Cassie's hands before it was fully clear of the trunk. She did that without deciding to. Cassie noticed. Cassie noticed everything and said about a third of it. "You do that every time." "Do what?" "Take it off me like I'm going to drop it in the fire." Hannah set the ledger on the bed. Worn brown cover gone soft as a glove at the corners. Habit. 6 years of habit, yes. Cassie sat back on her heels. Then she reached deeper and came up with the dress. It was rust brown wool, heavier than anything either of them would ever wear in an Arizona July, cut for a woman half a head shorter than Hannah. The hem was gone gray with age at the fold. There was a mend at the right cuff, and the mend was beautiful. A tiny, even running stitch that no store in the territory could have matched. Their mother's. Cassie ran her thumb along the hem. "This is good cloth." "It's still good cloth." "It is. So why won't you ever let me cut it down?" She held it up against her own shoulders, measuring by eye. "I could take 4 inches off the bottom and put a new band on it, and I'd have something to wear that didn't look like a scarecrow's." "Leave the hem alone." Cassie's head came up at the tone. Hannah heard the tone herself, and did not much care for it. She softened it, a little. "She asked me not to." Right at the end. She was full of laudanum, and she wasn't making much sense, and she took my wrist and she said, "Don't cut the hem." "And you never asked why." "She was dying, Cassie." "You don't cross-examine a dying woman about her sewing." Cassie folded the dress and laid it in the trunk with more care than she had shown anything else that night, and neither of them said another word about it, and the lid came down, and the wire hasp held the way it had held for 13 years. Hannah put out the lamp. She lay in the dark for a long while, with her hands folded on her stomach, and the shape of the trunk visible against the window light. Somewhere in that room, 4 feet from her head, 3 pieces of paper were sewn into the hem of a dead woman's dress. She did not know it. Not that night. Not for another 5 weeks. They rode out to the Twin Post before sunup on Monday. The valley road climbed for 4 miles and then bent north along a shoulder of the foothills. And when it came around the last cut, the whole spread opened up below the Pinaleños in the gray light. It was bigger than Hannah had pictured. Not showy. That was the first thing she understood about it. There was no white fence, no painted trim, no house built to be seen from the road. It was big the way a working outfit is big. Corrals laid out with thought. A long, low bunkhouse. 2 barns, 1 old and 1 3 years newer. Stock tanks fed off a windmill that turned with a slow, deliberate creak. A main house of squared logs and adobe with a porch that ran the length of it, and a chimney that was already drawing. Men were moving in the near corral before the sun cleared the ridge. A dog came out to the gate to investigate them, circled Cassie's horse twice, made some interior determination, and went back to whatever a dog does at 5 in the morning. The squat man with the gray mustache met them at the porch steps. Ike Boone, 54 years old. Face weathered all the way down to its essential features, like a post that has been in the ground long enough to lose its bark. Hat, vest, boots with a spur strapped on one heel and not the other, which Hannah later learned was because he had lost the other one in 1877 and considered the matter closed. Miss Mercer, Mr. Boone Ike. He looked past her at Cassie. You the horse one. I'm the horse one. Toby'll show you the string. He jerked his chin toward the barn. Don't get on the roan. Cassie looked at the barn, then back at him. Why not? Because I said don't. Which, Hannah thought, was going to go extremely badly, and which did, though not until Thursday. Ike walked Hannah through the kitchen, the pantry, the root cellar dug into the bank behind the house, and the outdoor cook fire the hands used in summer. Mr. Ward said you'd be particular about how things sit. That's accurate. He scratched the back of his neck. You want me to have the boys move anything? Not yet. Hannah was already turning slowly in the middle of the pantry, taking the shelves in from floor to ceiling. I'll tell you by the end of the day what I need. Ike looked at her sideways for a second. Yes, ma'am. And it was in the tone. She heard it and she filed it. A man revising his opening estimate. She spent the morning on inventory. The pantry was stocked, and it was a shambles. Somebody had been buying supplies, with no system at all, which meant things were lost behind other things, which meant certain staples had been ordered 4 times over, while others had run to the bottom weeks ago, and nobody had noticed until they were gone. She found a crock of lard gone rancid, and carried it out to the yard, and pitched it in the slop bucket. She found a 50-pound sack of flour stored on the floor against an outside wall, where the damp came through, and it had begun to turn on the underside, and she carried that out too, and it cost the twin post $4, and it saved them a week of bad bread. She made a list. Then she reorganized the shelves, and the reorganizing took 2 hours, and by the end of it a person could stand in that doorway and see every single thing the outfit owned, in one sweep of the eye. At noon she put lunch on the table for 9. Gideon, Ike, Toby Grange, who was 40, and had said 11 words since Hannah arrived. Wesley Pruitt, 24. First real season, with the open, unguarded face of a young man who has not yet learned to keep his thoughts off it. 2 older hands named Hobbs and Cordray, who had been with the outfit since the 2nd year. 2 seasonal men in for the gather. And Cassie, who came in with hay in her braid and dirt on both palms, and sat down at the far end like she had been eating at that table for a decade. Hannah made nothing elaborate. Biscuits, salt beef, a pan of gravy off the drippings, pickled beets out of the cellar. It was not a meal designed to impress anybody, and that was deliberate, because impressing a table of working men on the first day is a way of setting an expectation you cannot hold on a Tuesday in November. It was designed to show range, which is a different thing. She had it on the boards at noon straight up. The men came in and ate. Several said nothing at all, which she had expected and did not resent. Wesley Pruitt said it was awful good twice and turned red the 2nd time. Hobbs took 3 biscuits and put 2 in his shirt pocket for later, which Hannah decided to interpret as a compliment. Ike Boone ate 2 full helpings of the biscuits and then set down his fork and said, with tremendous care, as though the words were load-bearing, "These are good." Gideon Ward ate at the far end of the table and said nothing through the whole meal. When he finished, he set his fork down and pushed his chair back an inch and looked down the length of the boards at her. Those are the best biscuits I've had in 3 years. The flour in your pantry is fresh. Hannah did not thank him. Somebody's been buying the wrong grind. Then you'll order the supplies from here on. That would be more efficient. He stood, put his hat back on, and went out to the horses. Ike Boone, who had watched the entire exchange over the rim of his coffee, turned his head slowly and looked at Hannah with the expression of a man recalculating something in the back of his skull. Hannah started clearing the table. Cassie broke Ike's rule on Thursday. The roan was a 5-year-old, with a white crescent on the off hind, and an opinion about being handled that had put Toby Grange in the dirt 3 times in 6 weeks. Toby had a system. Toby's system was patience and a lot of rope. Cassie stood at the corral rail for 20 minutes and did not touch a rope at all. Then she went in with nothing in her hands. Ike came around the barn at a walk, saw her in there, and stopped moving entirely, which for Ike Boone was the equivalent of a shout. The roan came at her sideways, ears back. Cassie turned her shoulder with kindness, and let it come, and then simply walked away from it at an angle, and the roan, having been offered a fight and finding no one to have it with, stopped and stood there confused. 40 minutes later, she was leading it around the pen with a hand on its neck. Toby watched the whole thing from the rail with his arms folded. When she came out, he said the longest sentence Hannah ever heard from him. "Took me 6 weeks on that horse." Cassie shrugged, unbuckling nothing because she had used nothing. "You were talking to him with the rein. He can't read a rein. Nobody taught him letters." Toby thought about that for a while. Then he said, "Huh," and went back to work. And from that day forward the roan was Cassie's and nobody argued. Hannah learned the shape of Gideon Ward, the way she learned everything, which was by watching what people did when they thought nobody was keeping score. He worked the same hours his men worked, not longer for the look of it, which some owners did, and not shorter for the dignity of it, which more of them did. He carried his own plate to the basin, every meal. The other men left theirs where they sat, and Hannah cleared them, and thought nothing of it, because that was the job. But Gideon Ward stood up, and took his plate and his cup to the wash basin every single time, and he did it without looking around to see whether anyone had noticed. When Wesley Pruitt set a line of fence posts too shallow and cost the outfit a day, Gideon did not raise his voice. He asked the boy to walk him through what he had done, step by step, from the first hole. He listened to the whole account. Then he told him, plainly and without heat and without an audience, exactly what to do differently, and then he went back to work and never mentioned it again. And in the evenings he read actual books, not just the Tucson paper. Hannah would be finishing in the kitchen, the men's voices gone out to the bunkhouse, the lamp turned low, and she would hear from the next room the small, dry sound of a page turning. She found it comforting in a way she was not prepared for, because proof of another person's inner life is a comfort when you have spent a long time believing you were the only one in your world carrying one around. She told herself she was noticing these things practically, analytically, because understanding a place and the people in it was how a person did the work well. She was mostly convincing. There was a hair comb on the windowsill of the front room. Horn. Yellowed. Fine-toothed, a woman's comb, sitting flat on the sill under a film of dust that had plainly been accumulating for a long time. The first week, Hannah reached for it with her dustcloth without thinking. Ike Boone was in the doorway with an armload of kindling, and his voice came across the room, flat and fast. "Leave that sill." Hannah's hand stopped. He set the kindling down. He did not look at her. "Don't dust it, don't move it, don't ask about it." And then he went out, and Hannah stood in the front room with a cloth in her hand, and a great deal of information she did not want. On the 9th day, Wesley Pruitt came into the kitchen looking for coffee and found Hannah shelling beans. He was easy to be around. He had no guile in him at all, which in that valley was practically a medical condition. He asked, with genuine friendly curiosity, whether she was Amos Mercer's daughter, the one from the East Creek place. Hannah's hand stopped moving for half a second. "I am." "Thought so." Wesley poured his coffee, entirely at ease, entirely unaware. "My brother rides for the county. He's been out that way a lot this summer." He blew across the cup. "Says Mr. Thorne's been asking after that strip pretty regular. Riding the line on it. Had a load of fence posts out to the bend twice in July." Hannah sat very still. "Your brother." "Leland." Wesley grinned, and there was nothing behind the grin but a young man fond of his family. "He's a deputy, 9 years older than me. He's the smart one, way my mother tells it." He took his coffee and went out. Hannah looked down at the bowl of beans in her lap and did not move for a full minute. Fence posts. You do not haul fence posts to a bend in a creek unless you intend to fence something. You do not fence something unless you intend to hold it. You do not intend to hold it unless you believe with some confidence that it is about to be yours. She got up and put the beans on the stove and started supper, because supper was the job, and the job was how she held herself in one piece. But her hands were not steady, and she noticed that they were not, and she did not like it. The trouble came on a Thursday. Hannah was at the stove when she heard a horse come into the yard at a pace that was wrong for a routine arrival. Too fast on the last 20 yards. A man who has ridden with a message rides differently than a man who has ridden with a saddle. She heard Ike's voice, then another voice, flatter, official in its cadence, the voice of a man who reads documents aloud for a living. Then Gideon, quieter than either of them and somehow more present, the way a low note under a chord is more present than the chord. She did not go to the window. It was not her business, and she had spent 6 years understanding precisely where the boundaries of her business lay. But she stood there with a spoon in her hand and she strained to hear, because something in the shape of the voices told her it was not about cattle. The rider left after 11 minutes. Gideon came into the kitchen 20 minutes after that. He stood inside the door without speaking, which she had learned by then was how he assembled a thing before he put it into words. She let him stand. You know a man named Silas Thorne? Hannah set the spoon down on the stove edge. She knew that name the way a person knows the name of the one who did them harm that cannot be undone. Not with anger. Not for years now. With a bone-deep recognition that lives below the level of feeling, in the part of a person that keeps the accounts. I do. He's filed a claim. Gideon took his hat off and turned it once in his hands, which was as close as he came to fidgeting. 160 acres east of town. Strip that runs along the creek bed. The kitchen was very quiet. That land, Hannah said, and she heard her own voice come out slow and careful, was my father's. Gideon's face did not change, but something in his eyes narrowed and sharpened, the way a man's eyes do when a shape he has been squinting at resolves. Tell me, she pulled out a chair and sat down. And then she told him the thing she had told exactly one other person in 6 years. And that person was Ellen Tuttle at the laundry, and she had told it in pieces over 2 winters, and never all at once. My father borrowed $40 from Silas Thorne in the 2nd year of the drought, 74. He lost 11 head that spring, and he needed to get to the fall sale. Her hands were flat on the table. The paper was written in language he didn't fully follow. He had about 2 years of school in Tennessee, and he taught himself the rest, and he was proud of the rest. And pride like that has a soft place in it, and Thorne knew where it was. Go on. My father died in January of 75. Pneumonia. 19 days. She did not decorate it. The following spring, Thorne came out with documents. He said the land had been pledged as security. He had a paper that said it, signed and witnessed, dated the year of the loan. Was it his signature? It was something that looked like it. Hannah's jaw set. I was 20 years old and I had never seen those papers before in my life. My father never mentioned them. He mentioned everything. He talked about a fence line for a week. Gideon set his hat on the table, and nobody contested it. And this was the part. This was the part she had never once said out loud in this order. I contested it. His head came up. I walked into the county recorder's office in Dry Fork on the 14th of April, 1875, Hannah said, with my father's ledger under my arm. 9 miles. I left before it was light because I wanted to be first at the counter. The stove ticked. There was a clerk named Crandall. 62 years old then, thin fellow, spectacles. There were maybe 11 people in that hallway, waiting on deeds and water filings and I don't know what else. Her voice had gone flat and precise. The way it went when she was walking a road she had walked 10,000 times in her head. I put the ledger on the counter and I opened it to the page and I turned it around so he could read it right way up. She stopped. He didn't read it. Gideon did not move. He put 2 fingers on the cover and he closed it. Hannah's hand made the motion on the tabletop, small, unconscious. And he said, so that the hallway could hear him, that the office did not accept filings from persons without legal standing. And then he told the man at the door to see me out. The kitchen held very still. I stood on those steps for 40 minutes. She said it without any self-pity at all, which made it far worse. I couldn't think what to do next. I kept thinking there was a next thing, and I would remember it if I stood there long enough. And then I walked 9 miles home. Gideon Ward looked at the tabletop for a long moment. I carried that book through 11 rooms since, Hannah said. Not because I had any hope for it, because it was his, and I never could work out where a person would set it down. He stood up. Where is it now? In my mother's trunk. 15 steps from where you're standing. Go get it. Hannah's chin came up, and something in her flared. 6 years of it, hot and sudden. What for? Nobody would open it then. Why would anybody open it now? Gideon put his hat back on. Because in 75 you didn't have a lawyer in Prescott. He said it perfectly evenly. Now you do. That evening, after supper, after the men had gone out to the bunkhouse, and the kitchen was scrubbed, and the night had settled full and heavy over the valley, Hannah sat down at the kitchen table with her mother's trunk open on the floor beside her and her father's ledger in her hands. She had not opened it in 4 years. She had carried it. That was different. Carrying a thing does not require you to look inside it. The cover was worn soft. The corners had gone round. Her father's handwriting filled every page, front and back, in the careful, deliberate script of a man who had taught himself to write in his 20s and had never once gotten over how remarkable it was that marks on paper could hold a fact still. Dates, amounts, names, weather sometimes in the margins. Rain at last, 3/4 of an inch, thank God. Cow number 9 calved, bull calf both up. Delia's birthday gave her the good comb. Hannah turned pages until she reached the spring of 1874, and there it was. Borrowed of S. Thorne, $40, against expectation of spring cattle. Terms, repayment October or settlement in goods. And underneath, on its own line, in a hand that pressed harder than the line above it, no land pledged, no land discussed. Hannah put her thumb gently over the words. The way a person touches a thing to make certain it is real. 6 years. 6 years of carrying it through 11 rooms, and it had been saying that the entire time, in her father's own hand, in his own ink on a page with a date at the top of it. There was a knock at the kitchen doorframe. Gideon was standing there with 2 cups of coffee, which surprised her because she had never once seen him make coffee in the evening. He set one on the table near her hand. He did not sit down. He stood in the doorway and waited to be asked, and she understood, watching him not sit, that he had waited on that threshold on purpose, and that the waiting was the whole message. She turned the ledger around and pushed it toward him and put her finger on the line. He bent over it. He read it twice. He did not say anything for a moment. Then, your father was careful. He was. Hannah wrapped both hands around the cup. He was careful about everything that mattered. He just never could afford to fight for any of it. The lamp guttered and steadied. Gideon straightened up and picked up his own cup. His daughter can. He went back to his book. Hannah sat alone in that kitchen, with the coffee going cold at her elbow and the summer night coming in through the window, crickets and a horse shifting somewhere and the windmill turning slow. She sat with the words her father had written 7 years ago and thought about fighting for things. She thought she might be learning how. Then, because she was not ready to close it, because she wanted to sit with his handwriting a while longer the way you sit with a voice, she turned past the entry and kept going. 75. 76. The last 2 years were thinner. Fewer entries, shorter, the hand less steady toward the end. She turned to the back of the book and stopped. Near the spine 3/4 of the way through, where the binding cords showed through the gutter, there was a cut, not a tear. Not the ragged separation of old paper giving up at the fold. A cut, clean, straight, made with a blade held close and drawn carefully down against the stitching. The way a person cuts when they intend to leave the rest of the book intact. Hannah put her finger into the gap and felt the stubs. 3 pages, maybe 4. Gone. She held the ledger up toward the lamp and turned it to the light and looked at the edge of the cut, and the paper there had gone the same dull ivory as the rest of the block, which meant the cut was not new, which meant it had been made years ago, which meant it had been made before she ever carried this book out of that house. Somebody had opened her father's ledger. Somebody had taken a knife to it. Somebody had removed 3 pages from the end of it and closed it again and put it back where it lived. And she had been carrying it through 11 rooms for 6 years and had never once known. Hannah Mercer sat alone at a kitchen table on a ranch in the Pinaleño foothills at 10:30 at night, with a lamp burning down and her father's handwriting under her hands. And she looked at that clean, bright edge where 3 pages used to be. She did not know who, she did not know when, and she did not know what had been written on them. The objection came down from Tucson in a sealed envelope on the 12th of September, and Elias Thatcher did not send it out by the mail rider. He rode the 11 miles himself and got to the Twin Post at 9 in the morning, with his collar undone and 4 days of road on him. And Hannah knew before he was off the horse, because a man who sends letters for a living does not deliver one in person unless he cannot stand to be somewhere else when it is opened. She did not take him to the kitchen. She took him to the porch, because the kitchen had become a place where good things happened, and she had a superstition about it she would not have admitted to under oath. Gideon came up from the corrals with his gloves still on. Thatcher put the envelope on the porch rail. Vance has answered. How bad? He didn't touch the ledger. Thatcher took his spectacles off and held them, which Hannah had learned to read by now, and it was not a good reading. He went for you. Hannah's hands did not move on the rail. Say it plain. He has filed 2 objections. The first argues that the book has been materially interfered with. Thatcher's voice was flat and professional, and underneath it was something close to fury. He cites the excised pages. He does not claim to know what was on them. He does not have to. He says only that a book which has had a knife taken to its binding cannot be offered as an unaltered record, and he asks the bench to strike it entirely. Because, of course, would you treat them with kindness? Because Thatcher had said it in his own office 6 weeks ago, with the weighscale clanking under the floor, and she had heard him say it, and she had walked out onto that boardwalk anyway and let herself believe the worst thing was behind her. Hannah heard her own voice come out very quiet. He doesn't have to prove my father lied. No, he only has to make it look like I'm the one who cut it. That is precisely the shape of it. Thatcher put the spectacles back on. A woman who has carried her father's book alone for 6 years, and now produces it, conveniently, with 3 pages missing that no one else has ever seen. Gideon had not said a word. He took his gloves off, one and then the other, and set them on the rail beside the envelope, and the whole of him had gone very still, in a way Hannah had come to associate with weather building. And the second objection. Thatcher hesitated, which he had never done. In 6 weeks, Elias Thatcher had never once hesitated, not over money, not over odds, not over the plain statement that they might lose. Read it. Miss Mercer, read it to me. So he did. He unfolded the sheet and he read it in his professional voice, which made it worse, because the professional voice made it sound like a fact, that the claimant, Hannah Mercer, is not a lawful heir of the decedent Amos Mercer, that the marriage alleged between the said Amos Mercer and one Delia, a Chiricahua woman, was solemnized in 1852 according to the custom of her people, and was never recorded with any civil authority of this territory or its predecessor, that no license was issued, that no return was made, that in consequence no lawful marriage subsisted, that the claimant and her sister are therefore without standing to bring this action, and the court need not reach the question of the ledger at all, the said claimant having no more interest in the said parcel than any stranger. Thatcher stopped reading. The windmill turned. Somewhere out past the barn, a horse blew. Hannah stood on that porch with both hands on the rail and understood that she had just been handed a piece of paper that said her father was not her father, not that the land was not hers, that she was not his. There is a difference between being robbed and being erased, and she had spent 6 years learning the first one and had never in her life been handed the second. They can't. They can file it. They have filed it. Thatcher folded the sheet. Whether they can sustain it is another matter, and I want to be honest with you, because you have never once asked me to be gentle. Under territorial law, as it stands, and before a judge who has no particular appetite for the question, They can sustain it more easily than they ought to be able to. Cassie, treat them with kindness. Came the corner of the house with a bridle over her shoulder and stopped, because she had heard the last of it. She got about 4 steps before her voice went up. Say that again. Cassie. No, say it again. I want to hear the part where a man in Tucson gets to decide whether our mother was married. Cassie. She had 2 children and 19 years, and a grave up on that hill, with a stone Papa cut himself, and some lawyer who never met her writes on a piece of paper that it doesn't count. Nobody answered her. Would you treat them with kindness? Which was the worst thing anybody could have done, and Hannah knew it and could not manage anything else, because her own throat had closed entirely. Cassie threw the bridle at the porch post. It hit and slid down and lay there. So what do we do? Thatcher opened his mouth, and Hannah heard herself speak before he did, and her voice came out of her strange and low and almost calm. Crandall was right. All 3 of them looked at her. 6 years ago, she was not looking at any of them. She was looking at the yard, at the dust, at nothing. That clerk closed my father's book with 2 fingers and told a hallway full of people that the office does not accept filings from persons without legal standing. She turned around. He wasn't being cruel. He was being early. Gideon Ward moved. He came off that porch and crossed the yard toward the barn at a pace nobody at the Twin Post had ever seen him use, and he had a bridle off the wall and was into the stall with the bay before Hannah had come down the steps. Ike Boone got there first. Ike Boone was 54 years old and 5 inches shorter than his employer, and he stood in the stall door, with his arms out like a man stopping a runaway. Move, no sir, Ike. What's your plan? Ike did not raise his voice. He did not move either. You going to ride into Dry Fork and put your hands on a lawyer? All right, say you do. Say you break Bertram Vance's jaw in the street with 40 people watching. Get out of the door. Then what? Ike's chin came up. Then Sheriff Dunmore has you in a cell by supper, and there's a bond to post and a charge to answer to, and the whole territory hears that the man backing this woman's claim is a man who beats lawyers in the road, and every word out of her mouth from here forward gets weighed against that. Gideon stood with the bridle in his fist. You lose her case for her. Ike's voice dropped. In one afternoon. Because you needed to feel like you'd done something. The bay shifted in the straw. Gideon Ward stood there a long moment with his jaw working, and then he hung the bridle back on the nail. And it was the way he hung it, carefully on the peg, square, that told Hannah from the barn door how much it had cost him. He came out past her without looking at her. Mr. Ward. He stopped. Thank you, she said for naught. Don't thank me for that. I'm going to anyway. She waited until he turned, because a man who fights for me in the street is a man who took it off me, and I've had enough taken. He looked at her. Then he went and moved a stock tank that did not need moving, alone for an hour and a half. Hannah left before daylight on the 14th. Would you treat them with kindness? She did not tell anybody where she was going, because she was not entirely certain until she was on the road, and because she had a suspicion that if she said it out loud in that kitchen, somebody would offer to come, and she was not going to spend the one thing she had left on company. She left a note on the table, waited with the salt cellar. Cold cellar has meat through Thursday. Bread in the tin. Beans soaked and on the back of the stove. They want 2 hours, and a look at them. I will be back. She took the wagon and the mule and $11. The first day she went up. 9 miles north and then off the road entirely, on a track that was not a track so much as a memory of one, climbing along the shoulder of the range through juniper and burnt grass, until the valley was a pale spill below her, and the air had gone thin and cold in the shade. Her mother's people had been moved twice, and had come back once, and were living, that autumn, in a scatter of brush shelters and 2 board houses along a spring that had never in living memory gone dry. Hannah had not been up there in 4 years. She was received the way a person is received who has stayed away, which is to say courteously and with a certain amount of accounting going on behind the eyes. She sat down and drank what she was given, and did not come to the point for the better part of an hour, because coming to the point immediately was a thing white people did, and she had been raised to know better. Then she came to the point. She needed people who had been at the wedding, not people who had heard about it. People who had stood there in the spring of 1852, when a red-haired man from Tennessee with a plow and no sense had married a woman named Delia in front of her family, and who could say so out loud to a federal officer with their hand raised. There were three, 68, 71, and a man of 79, who had been Delia's cousin, and who remembered, without being prompted, that Amos Mercer had brought 4 horses, and had made a speech that nobody could follow because his accent was so thick, and that Delia had laughed at him in the middle of it, and that the laughing was the part everybody remembered. Hannah wrote it down. All of it. Names and ages and where they could be found. The oldest one put his hand on her wrist before she left and said something in the language she had lost most of, and she understood about half, and the half she understood was, "Your mother knew this day was coming." She rode down out of the mountain at dusk, with her chest full of something she did not have a word for. The second day she went to the chapel. There was no parish in that valley in 1856. There was a circuit preacher named Josiah Kern who had ridden a loop from the Gila down through the flats and back for 21 years, marrying and burying and baptizing, and writing every single one of them in a set of pocket ledgers he kept in a saddlebag, and who had died in 1870, and left the whole set to the little board chapel in Dry Fork because he had no family to leave anything else to. The chapel had them in a crate under the vestry table. Nobody had opened the crate in 11 years. Hannah sat on the vestry floor from 10 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon with 14 pocket ledgers around her, in a half circle and dust to her elbows, going year by year, hand by hand through a dead man's handwriting. She found it in the 6th book. April 14, 1856. Baptized this day at the Mercer place on the East Creek, Hannah, infinite daughter of Amos Mercer and Delia Mercer, his wife. Witnessed, J. Kern, his wife. Written in 1856, 19 years before Silas Thorne ever produced a piece of paper. 25 years before Bertram Vance sat down in Tucson and decided that a Chiricahua woman had not been married. Hannah put her hand flat on the page and sat on that floor and did not move for a while. Would you treat them with kindness? Then she found the second entry, 1859, Cassandra, infant daughter of the same, and she copied both out in her own hand and had the chapel warden sign underneath that he had witnessed her copy against the original, and she asked him to lock the crate, and he did, and she watched him do it. The third day was the tax office, which was the day she had been dreading, which was the day 'cause the county tax office in Dry Fork was 2 doors down from the county recorder's office, and the county recorder's office had a set of steps out front that Hannah Mercer had stood on for 40 minutes when she was 20 years old. She walked past the steps. She did not look at them. Then she went 10 feet farther, stopped, turned around, went back and looked at them properly for about 4 seconds, because she was not going to spend the rest of her life managing a set of stairs. Then she went into the tax office. The assessor was a bored man named Purvis, who had held the post since '78, and who did not care about anything except closing at 4 East Creek parcel, 160 acres. Mercer. That's in dispute. I'm not asking about the dispute. I'm asking what was paid on it and by who. Purvis pulled the books because it was easier than arguing, and Hannah Mercer stood at that counter for 2 hours and 40 minutes. And went through 19 years of territorial tax receipts on the East Creek parcel, and she found what she had gone there hoping to find in the 4th book she opened, and then she found it again and again and again, because her father had been careful about everything that mattered. Because in 1862, on the assessment return, Amos Mercer had entered the ownership of the parcel as A and D Mercer. And in 1864, and 1867, and 1868, and 1870, and 1871, and 1872, and 1873, and 1874. 11 separate years. 11 separate returns, in his hand, filed with the territory. in which a man declared before the government that the land he was paying on belonged to himself and to his wife, and the territory had taken the money every single time. Hannah paid Purvis $2.20 for certified copies and stood at that counter while he wrote them out and stamped them, and her hands were flat on the wood and she was breathing very carefully, because here it was. Because the same government that had just been asked to say her mother was nobody's wife had a drawer full of receipts in its own building with its own stamp on them, taking that woman's tax money for 19 years. Purvis handed the copies across. That everything? That's everything. She came up the valley road at dusk on the third day, with a leather satchel on the seat beside her and 40 miles of dust on her. Gideon was at the gate, not on the porch. At the gate in the road, which meant he had been out there a while, and neither of them mentioned it then or ever. Ike had the mule before she was fully down. Cassie came out of the barn at a dead run and stopped 6 feet short because Cassie did not do the other thing. 3 days. I said I'd be back. You said a lot of things on a piece of paper with a salt cellar on it. Hannah put the satchel on the porch rail and did not sit down. Get Thatcher. He was there in an hour and a half, and Hannah Mercer stood in the front room of the Twin Post Ranch house at 8 o'clock at night, still in her road clothes, and laid it out on the table one piece at a time in the order she had built it. 3 living witnesses to the marriage in 1852. Names, ages, where they can be found. 2 of them will come down. The third is 79 and can't ride, and if a federal officer wants his statement, the federal officer can go up the mountain and get it. Thatcher's pen was already moving. A baptismal entry from April of 1856, made by a circuit preacher named Kern, in a book that has been under a table in the Dry Fork Chapel since 1870. It records me as the infant daughter of Amos Mercer and Delia Mercer, his wife. She set the copy down. That was written 19 years before Silas Thorne produced anything at all. Nobody manufactured that. Nobody knew it was going to matter. It's been sitting in a crate collecting mouse dirt, while I got told I had no standing. And that is 11 years of territorial tax returns on the East Creek parcel. Hannah's hand came down flat on the certified copies, filed by my father, in his hand, declaring the ownership as A and D Mercer, 1862 through 1874. Thatcher went absolutely motionless, Mr. Thatcher, and Hannah Mercer's voice did not shake, and it did not rise, and it went through that front room like a rail spike. This territory took my mother's tax money for 19 years. If the government thought they were married enough to collect, then the government can think they were married enough to give it back. Nobody said anything. Then Elias Thatcher sat down slowly in a chair he had not been offered. I have practiced 22 years. So you've said. I have never had a client build her own record. He was looking at the table, at the 11 receipts squared up on it. Not assist. Not answer questions. Build it. From nothing in 3 days on a mule. It wasn't from nothing. Hannah's voice went quieter. My father built most of it. He just built it in 1862 and didn't know what for. She did not look at Gideon. She was aware of him standing at the end of the room, with his hat in his hand, and she did not look at him, because she could feel that he was looking at her, and because when she finally did glance over, his face had no arrangement on it at all. None. No composure, no management, no door held shut with a boot. He was you treat them with kindness. And whatever was in it was not admiration, and was not pity, and was not the calculation of a man weighing an asset, and Hannah looked away before she could put a name on it. There was one more paper in the satchel. She had found it on the 3rd afternoon, in the tax books, 3 drawers over from where she had been looking, and she had stood at Purvis's counter and read it 4 times. She did not put it on the table. She folded it into quarters and put it in the pocket of her dress, and she carried it there for 11 days, because it did not belong to her, because it was not about her father, or her mother, or 160 acres along the East Creek, and because she was not at all certain that the man it belonged to would want it. Hannah went into Dry Fork on the 22nd to sign the amended filing. She wore the blue dress. Would you treat them with kindness? Which was a decision she made at 5 a.m, standing in front of a room with a door that locked, and which she could not have explained to anybody. Would you treat them with kindness? And which had a great deal to do with the fact that she was about to walk into a lawyer's office on the main road, where anybody could see her go in. She signed 4 documents. She read all 4 first, all the way through, which took 40 minutes and which Thatcher did not once try to hurry. Then she came down the outside stairs and started for the wagon, and a voice behind her said her name. She stopped. Silas Thorne was standing about 20 feet up the boardwalk with his hat in his hand, which she had not expected, because a man does not take his hat off to a person he intends to threaten. She had not stood this close to him since she was 20 years old. He had gone older. That was the first thing. The certainty had not kindness, but the face around gone anywhere, and there was a tremor in the hand holding the hat that had not been there in 1875, and that he was managing by keeping the hand still against his leg. He came up the boards at an easy pace. "Miss Mercer? Mr. Thorne, I wonder whether you'd give me 2 minutes. I'd say we've started." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. He stopped at a comfortable talking distance. The distance of a man who has spent a lifetime holding conversations in public that look perfectly civil from across a street. "You're making a mistake." His voice was mild, reasonable, almost warm. "You and Ward both explain it to me. Courts don't run on the notebooks of dead farmers." He put his hat back on. "They run on documents filed correctly through the proper channels by people who understood what they were signing. Your father was a decent man. I've said that, and I meant it. I was sorry when he went. But what a man writes in a book in his own kitchen doesn't change what was agreed between him and me." "What was agreed," Hannah said, "was $40 against the spring cattle. It's on a dated page. Paper can say a great many things." "It can." Hannah did not move. "Which is why I'd rather have the one he wrote in 1874 than the one you wrote in 1875. Thorne's eyes went over her face with an interest that was almost impersonal, the way a man looks at a fence to find where it has been spliced. And then he changed the subject, and that was how she knew she had hit something. "Your sister rides well." Hannah went very cold and very still. "She's out on that Ward roan most mornings. Comes down the flat road past the Coyle place." He was looking down the street, not at her. "Last month Deputy Pruitt asked her for her papers outside the store. I heard about it. That sort of thing happens." Thorne's tone did not alter by a hair. "It can happen again. And I'd say there's no guarantee the next one ends with a quirt handed back." The main road of Dry Fork went on around them. A wagon passed. Somebody laughed inside the store. "I'm not threatening you, Miss Mercer," he said it gently, and it was the gentleness that made it obscene. "I'm describing the town to you. There's a difference." Hannah looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached into her pocket. "I've never bluffed in my life." Her voice came out perfectly even. "I don't know how. I grew up without money enough to waste any of it on misdirection. So I got in the habit of saying exactly what I mean and letting people do what they like with it." She took out the silver dollar, 3 months in her pocket, worn a little brighter on one face from her thumb. She took his hand, which startled him badly, and she put the coin in it and closed his fingers over it. "You left this on my table at the market in July. I don't take your money, Miss Mercer. My father already settled with you." She let go of his hand and stepped back. $25. The 9th of September, 1874. Part payment on the note. Silas Thorne did not move. "And you signed the receipt for it," Hannah said. "In the margin. In your own hand, and there it was. Not a collapse. Not a stagger. The man had run this valley by the throat for 19 years, and he did not go to pieces on a boardwalk in front of a hardware store, but something behind his eyes shifted a 1/4 inch. Because he had spent 6 years having a house searched and a book taken and returned and a woman watched from one rented room to the next, and he had satisfied himself somewhere around 1878 that whatever Amos Mercer had written that September was gone. And it was not gone. "That's not possible. It's in a lawyer's safe in this town," Hannah said. "It's been there since the 6th. Thorne's jaw worked once. This ends badly for everybody. For some of us worse than others. She walked past him. She did not hurry, and she did not look back, and her hands on the reins were absolutely steady, and it was not until she was 2 miles out on the valley road that she had to pull the mule up and sit for a minute with her forehead against the back of her own wrist. Behind her, on the boardwalk, Silas Thorne had turned and looked down the length of the street, and a man leaning against a post outside the livery, 29 years old with a deputy's star and his brother's chin, straightened up off it and gave one short nod. The dog started at 10 minutes past 3 in the morning, then stopped. And it was the stopping that woke Cassie Mercer, because a dog that barks and runs down is a dog that has settled a question, and a dog that barks and cuts off in the middle is a dog that has met somebody it knows. She lay there for 3 seconds. Then she smelled it. Smoke does not smell like anything at 3 in the morning in a house that has a banked stove in it, until it does, and then there is no mistaking it for one instant, because wood smoke from a chimney is thin and clean, and this was thick and wrong, and had kerosene underneath it. Cassie hit the hall at a run, and was through her sister's door without knocking. Fire. They came out the kitchen door together, and the whole east side of the yard was orange. The storehouse, which was the long, low shed behind the main house, where the outfit kept its winter flour and its salt and its spare harness, and where Hannah Mercer had put her mother's trunk on the 14th of July because there had not been room for it in a room with a door that locked. The whole north wall was gone already. Ike Boone came out of the bunkhouse in his union suit and his boots and no hat and started roaring before he had covered 10 yards, and the bunkhouse emptied behind him. Toby and Hobbs and Cordray and Wesley Pruitt with a blanket already in his fists. Gideon was at the water trough. He had the horse blankets in and soaking before anybody else had reached the yard, and he threw the first one to Toby and the second to Hobbs, and he was shouting the only 2 orders that mattered. Barn first, because the barn was 40 feet downwind of the storehouse, and there were 19 head of horses in it. Cassie went for the barn. Ike went for the barn. Would you treat them with kindness? And Hannah Mercer stood in the yard in her nightdress with her bare feet in the dirt and watched the roofline of the storehouse go and understood, with a clarity that arrived all at once and completely, exactly what was in there. She ran. Gideon got a hand on her arm, and she went through it like it was a fence wire. Hannah. She did not stop. The doorway was still standing. The fire had come in through the north wall and was working across the ceiling joists, and the near end of the shed, the end with the trunk in it, had maybe 90 seconds left, and she did not have the sense that night to know it. The heat took the air out of her lungs at the door. She went in bent over, with her arm across her face, and she could not see anything for 4 seconds, and then she could, because the whole ceiling was lit, and the trunk was there, cedar and iron banded, sitting exactly where she had put it 8 weeks ago, and there was burning shingle on the lid. She got the handle. The trunk weighed 60 pounds empty, and she dragged it 11 feet across a dirt floor, with her nightdress smoking at the hem and her hair going, and she got it to the doorway and could not lift it over the sill. 2 hands came past her and took the other end. Wesley Pruitt. They got it into the yard, and Wesley threw a full bucket over her back, and she went down on her knees in the mud of it, coughing, and the shed roof came in behind them with a sound like a struck drum. They lost the storehouse. They saved the barn and the house and every horse, and by gray light there were 9 people standing in a yard full of black water and burnt flour with their faces streaked, and the only sound for a long time was the tin roof of the shed ticking as it cooled. Nobody died. Nobody was even badly burned. Hannah had a scald on the back of her left forearm the size of $1, and her hair was shorter on one side, and she did not notice either for 2 hours. Then she opened the trunk. The lid had held. The iron bands had held. The cedar had charred through in one place near the hasp, a hole about the size of a fist, where the burning shingle had sat on it and worked down. Right at the corner, right where the ledger lay. Hannah lifted it out, and the cover came away in her hands, and the block of the book came apart in the middle, and 40 pages of the heart of it went to grey flakes and lifted off on the morning air and were gone across the yard. Front cover. intact. Back cover, intact. Spine, intact. And nothing in the middle but a burnt-out core where the years 1872 through 1876 had been. She sat down in the mud. She did not say anything. She did not make a sound. She sat there with what was left of her father's handwriting in her lap, and her hands going black to the wrist, and she stayed there for a very long time. Cassie sat down beside her and did not touch her. Gideon Ward stood 5 paces off and did not come any closer, and Hannah understood later, much later, that this was the single kindest thing anybody did for her that morning. Because coming close would have made it his. Because a man who puts his arms around a woman in that yard at that hour takes something off her that she has not offered him. He stood there. The sun came up over the pinaleños. The tin ticked, and Hannah Mercer set the burnt cover down on the ground in front of her and put her palms on her knees and got up. Her voice, when it came, was cracked from the smoke and absolutely level underneath it. "Mr. Ward, ma'am. In my room. Bottom drawer of the dresser. There's a blue cloth book." He did not ask. He went, and he came back, and he put it in her hands, and it had never been in that storehouse for 1 minute of its life, because Hannah Mercer had bought it in Dry Fork for $1.10 on the day she filed, and had kept it 11 feet from where she slept ever since. 300 pages, 209 of them full. 19 years of her father's accounts copied out by hand, line for line, date for date, at a kitchen table between 10 o'clock and midnight, 4 to 6 nights a week, for 8 weeks, including the weather notes, including the birthdays, including bull calf, both up. Thatcher got there at 9:30. He had ridden from town on the word of a man. Ike had sent at first light, and he came into the yard at a canter and got down badly and stood looking at the black rectangle where the storehouse had been. Then he looked at Hannah's arm and her hair and did not comment. She put the burnt ledger on the porch boards, then the blue book beside it. Thatcher went through the blue book for 11 minutes without speaking. "You did this when?" "Started the day I filed. Finished last Tuesday." "Why?" "Because a man had already put a knife in that book once." Hannah's voice was still raw. "And a thing that has been cut once can be cut again." Elias Thatcher took his spectacles off, and this time he did not put them back on, and he pressed his thumb and forefinger against the bridge of his nose for a moment. "A transcript is not the original. I want to be clear with you. It will not carry the weight the book itself would have carried. I know that, but it carries 3 things." He held up one finger. "First, you made it before the fire. Thatcher will attest that he saw you writing in it in August, and Mr. Ward saw it, and by the look of him so did Boone. Which means when Vance stands up and says you destroyed a book to conceal what was in it, we produce a document you copied out of that book 8 weeks ago, at your own kitchen table, containing every entry including the ones that hurt you. A woman concealing something does not preserve 19 years of it in her own hand." Second finger. "Second, the 3 pages your mother sewed into that hem are not in this yard and never were. They have been in my safe in Dry Fork since the 6th of September. The receipt with Silas Thorne's signature on it is intact and untouched and 100% original." He stopped. Then he put his hand flat on the charred cover. "Third." Thatcher's voice changed entirely. "Somebody you treat them with kindness. Came onto this property at 3 o'clock in the morning and set fire to a building containing evidence in a matter pending before a federal officer. Nobody moved. Until last night we had a land dispute, Miss Mercer. This morning we have a crime. And crimes are not heard by a territorial judge in Tucson at his convenience once a quarter. Crimes bring United States Marshals." Hannah looked down at the ruined cover. The leather had gone hard and glossy black, and it had curled at the corners, like something that had tried to close itself. "They burned it because they're afraid of it." She said it quietly, to nobody. If they weren't afraid of it, they'd have let it sit. Wesley Pruitt did not sleep that night. He lay in the bunkhouse with his hands behind his head and his eyes open, and the smell of the burn coming in the window until 4:30, and then he got up and went out and sat on the coral rail in the dark until it started to gray, because he had seen it, because when he came out of that bunkhouse door at 3:10 with a blanket in his fists, he had looked once toward the head of the valley road, the way a man does, and there had been a horse going away up it at a hard gallop, about 200 yards, out with the fire behind it, throwing everything into relief, and Wesley Pruitt had been looking at horses since before he could walk. He found Gideon in the stable at 6. "Mr. Ward, Wesley, I need to say a thing, and I've been up all night deciding whether to say it, so I'd take it kindly if you let me get it out in one go." Gideon set the currycomb down. "Go on. Last night when I come out the door I seen a rider going up the valley road." Wesley's hands were shaking and he put them in his pockets. "Sorrel horse, light mane, white crescent on the off hind, right above the fetlock, comes to a point at the bottom. The stable was very quiet. That's my brother's horse." Gideon did not say anything. "Leland bought him off a man in Wilcox 2 summers back." Wesley's voice went thin and then came back. "I know that horse. I've fed that horse. I could pick it out of 40 head in the dark, and I did. Wesley, there's more. He got it out fast because he had rehearsed it on that rail for 2 hours, and knew that if he stopped he would not start again. He owes Mr. Thorne money. Gambling debt out of Wilcox going on 2 years. My mother don't know. I've known since the spring of '80 and I never told a living soul, because he's my brother, and because I kept thinking it'd come right on its own." He stopped. It didn't come right. Gideon Ward looked at that boy for a long moment. "Would you treat them with kindness?" And then he did not say the thing that would have been easy, which was that Wesley had done nothing wrong, or that it was not his fault, or any of the other soft nothings a man reaches for when somebody hands him a piece of their own family. "You'll say this again in front of a lawyer. I know it. And when you have," Gideon picked the currycomb poem back up, "you'll still have a job here. Both of those things are true at the same time, and neither one cancels the other." Wesley Pruitt got about 4 steps toward the door before his face went. He stood out in the yard with his back to the stable for a while. Then he went and got the harness that needed mending and sat down with it, because that was the only thing in the world he could think to do. Hannah gave Gideon the paper on the 11th day after the fire. Not in the kitchen. At the north fence in the last of the light, where he had gone after supper the way he did when a thing needed turning over. She had carried it 11 days. She had taken it out of her pocket 4 times and put it back 4 times, and she had lain awake over it. And she had come within about 90 seconds of burning it herself on the 2nd night, and had stopped, because burning a true thing is what Silas Thorne did. "I have something of yours." He turned. "It isn't mine. It's about you." She held it out. "I found it in the tax office in September, 3 drawers over from what I was after. I've had it since the 21st. He took it, unfolded it. It was a certified copy of a filed instrument, 1,873. A note of hand for $1,100 secured against the Twin Post stock, with a schedule of payments and an endorsement dated the 9th of August of that year, extending the term by 6 months. The extension Sarah Ward had ridden 90 miles to get, and at the head of the instrument, in the clerk's copperplate, the name of the holder of the note, S. Thorne. Gideon Ward did not say anything at all for a minute and a half. The light went off the top of the range. A night hawk went over. "I paid that off in '74. His voice had gone somewhere strange. "Cleared it in November. I put the receipt in a box and I never opened the box again. I know. I never looked at the name." He was staring at the sheet. 8 years. "I have sat at supper with that man's business twice a season, and I never once." "You had no reason to look." "I had every reason to look." "No." Hannah's voice was quiet and did not give an inch. "You had a wife in the ground and a note paid off and no earthly cause to go back into a box, and read a name that couldn't help you. That's not a failing, that's a man surviving a year." He folded the paper, unfolded it again. "Why now?" "Because I've had it 11 days, and I couldn't decide whether you'd want it. And then somebody burned a building on your ground at 3 in the morning." Hannah looked at him steadily. "You've a right to know who you're up against, and how long you've been up against him." Gideon stood at that fence with 8 years reorganizing themselves behind his face, because a man who calls a note early in the worst drought in 20 years does not know that the wife will drive it herself. That is not murder. That is not even malice, particularly. But it is a hand on a lever. And Silas Thorne's hand had been on that lever, and Sarah Ward had gone into a dry wash in a wagon because of where the lever went. Would you treat them with kindness? And the same hand was now reaching for 160 acres of creek bottom that had belonged to a man from Tennessee who wrote down the weather. I'm not using this. Hannah's head came up. What? In front of the land office. In front of anybody. He folded it one more time and held it out to her. It doesn't go in, Mr. Ward. That is 9 years of connection between him and this outfit. It is 9 years of connection between him and my wife. His voice did not rise. It went the other way, down, flat and immovable. And if I put Sarah in that room, then this becomes my case. Every man in that town who's been on the fence stops asking whether Silas Thorne robbed the Mercers and starts asking whether Gideon Ward's been carrying a grudge since '73. Hannah opened her mouth, closed it. Because he was right, and she hated that he was right. And underneath the hating she felt something come loose in her chest that had been fastened down for a long time. It's not my fight, Gideon said. I've never once said it was. I'm not fighting your battles, Miss Mercer. I'm standing next to you while you fight yours. There's a difference and I intend to keep it. The paper was still held out between them. Hannah took it, and she stood at that fence about 18 inches from a man in a cowhide vest, with his hat pushed back and the last light going off the range behind him. And she understood, completely, and all at once, and about 4 weeks later than everybody else on that ranch, that she was in love with him. She did not say it. He did not say it. She put the paper in her pocket and said something about the horses that neither of them heard, and they walked back down toward the house in the dark, not touching, about 1.5 feet apart. Elias Thatcher came out from Tucson on the 3rd of October with a satchel he would not put down. Would you treat them with kindness? He had been in the county recorder's office at the seat for 6 days, and he had found what he had gone looking for, and he had found something else besides, and he laid the second thing on the front room table without any preliminaries at all, a deed transfer, recorded in Pima County on the 19th of March this year. Hannah picked it up, 160 acres east strip of the creek, conveyed by Silas Thorne to Harlan Ashcroft, for a consideration of $1. Nobody spoke. $1 is not a purchase price, Thatcher said. $1 is the formalization of an understanding that already exists. It is what men write down when the real terms were settled somewhere else, and neither party wants those terms in a book. March. Hannah's voice was very careful. He filed the claim in August. Then Ashcroft agreed to take that land 5 months before Thorne had any legal right to it whatsoever. Yes, Cassie, from the doorway, flat, so he knew. He knew it was coming. Thatcher squared the papers, which is not the same as knowing how. Men are extraordinarily good at not knowing how. Hannah looked at the deed for a long time. She thought about a wagon coming up the valley road in August with a hired driver and a man in a gray suit taking inventory of a yard. She thought about a woman in silk gloves in a market road in July, and about how easy it is to be cruel to a person whose family your husband's business partner has already emptied out, because there is nothing left in them to push back with, and everybody can tell. 19 years. 5 families. $1. She set it down. File everything, which was a Monday, and on Wednesday at 20 minutes to midnight, with the whole valley black and the house down to 1 lamp, the dog started up in the yard again. Hannah was on her feet before she knew she had stood. Ike Boone came through the kitchen door with a lantern, and the rifle he had kept by his bunk since the fire, and his face said it was not a rider and it was not a fire, and he could not make sense of what it was. There's a buggy at the gate. Whose? That's the thing. Ike looked back over his shoulder. It's Ashcroft's rig. Ashcroft's not in it. Hannah went out onto the porch in her shawl with the lamp held up. 11 miles of dark road behind her. Alone, no driver. The reins still in her hands and her gloves off, and her knuckles white on the leather. Vivian Ashcroft. 51 years old, in a plain wool traveling dress with no lace on it, and her hair coming down on one side, and a tin box on the seat beside her that she was holding in place with her elbow, like it might get away. She did not get down. She looked at Hannah standing on that porch in a shawl with a lamp, and her voice came out of her cracked and fast and nothing at all like the voice from the market road in July, Miss Mercer. I need you to hear me out before I lose my nerve. Vivian Ashcroft came up the porch steps holding the tin box against her stomach with both arms, the way a woman carries something she has decided not to set down until it is taken from her. She did not apologize first. That was the thing Hannah noticed and could not immediately place, and understood an hour later had been the only reason she let her in the door. She put the box on the front room table and opened it and stepped back from it. That's my husband's private book, not the store ledger, the one he keeps at the house, in the desk in the back room, in a drawer that has a key I have had a copy of since 1868. Nobody touched it. Would you treat them with kindness? I took it out of that drawer at 8 o'clock this evening and I hitched the mess myself, which I have not done in 19 years, and I drove out here in the dark on a road I have never once driven alone. Gideon reached over and turned the book around. 4 entries. 3 years. Payments to S.T. No goods received. No invoice. No delivery. $1,100 total in cash out of a general merchant's own pocket into a private hand. And a line in Harlan Ashcroft's small crabbed script, dated the 3rd of February. ST gives assurance the East Strip will be clear before spring. I did not ask how. I do not want to know how. Hannah read it twice. Then Thatcher, who had ridden back out at 1 in the morning on Ike's word and had not been given time to put his collar on straight, turned the page and stopped. The last entry was 6 weeks newer than the others and the hand had gone unsteady. I did not agree to the fire. God help me, I did not agree to the fire. The front room was silent for a long moment. Cassie was the one who broke it from the doorway, arms folded, and her voice had no warmth in it whatsoever. Why? Vivian Ashcroft turned around. I want to be clear before anybody thanks me. Her hands were shaking and she let them. I did not come out here because I am a good woman. I came for 2 reasons and neither one of them is fine. Go on. My husband has not slept in 6 weeks. She said it plainly. He sits at the dining table at 3 o'clock in the morning, with a lamp and nothing in front of him. He has lost 11 pounds. He is going to die of this before any court gets the chance to try him, and I have watched it happen for a month and a half, and done nothing, because doing something meant coming out here. That's one. That's one. Vivian's chin came up, and she looked, for the first time, straight at Cassie Mercer. The other one is that I stood across the street outside my own husband's store in August and watched a deputy take a quirt out of your hand. Cassie did not move, and I said nothing. Vivian's voice came back. I stood in the shade them with kindness, watched a shade with Harriet Pike, and I watched a grown man do that to you in the road and I did not open my mouth, and I have thought about it every night since. And I have not been able to work out one single reason why I didn't, except that it did not occur to me that I could. She turned back to Hannah. In July I asked whether that was meant to be a dress. She did not soften it. She did not run from it. I said it because I knew that I could. That is the entire reason. There was no other reason. I did not dislike you. I had never spoken to you in my life. It was simply available to me and I took it, the way a person takes a thing off a shelf. The lamp guttered. And then I watched that sentence travel this town for 3 months like a sickness, Vivian said. And I understood that I was the one who let it out. Hannah stood very still. She had thought about this moment. Not specifically. Not this woman, in a plain wool dress at midnight, with her hair down on one side. But she had thought about what it would be worth to hear somebody say it. She had turned it over for years in rooms she was leaving. And now here it was. And she found that the thing she had expected to feel was not the thing she felt. What do you want from me? Nothing. Vivian's answer came without any hesitation at all. I am not here for anything. Then why the box? Because it is the only thing I own that is worth anything. Hannah looked at the tin box on the table. Then she said the thing that made Elias Thatcher's head come up sharply and made Cassie Mercer in the doorway go quietly and completely still. Mrs. Ashcroft. You'll have to say all of it out loud. I have just said it. You've said it in my kitchen at midnight to 5 people. Hannah's voice was level. You said the other thing in a public road on a market Saturday to 40. Vivian's face drained. You unmade my name where everybody could see, Hannah said. You'll put it back where everybody can see. In the town hall. In the daylight. In front of the same people who laughed. Vivian Ashcroft stood there in a room full of strangers with her arms empty. It took her a long time, yes. Marcus Hollander came into Dry Fork on the 11th of October on the noon freight from Tucson, and he came alone, and he was carrying his own bag. 55 years old, special investigator out of the office of the Commissioner of the General Land Office, and he had come 1,900 miles by rail and stage, and had a return ticket he had not dated. Dark suit, low-crowned hat, spectacles. He did not need for distance. A compact man with the efficient manner of somebody who has spent a career sorting through other people's arrangements and has developed both skill and impatience in roughly equal measure. He met with Thatcher for 4 hours on the Wednesday. He met with Hannah for 3 hours on the Thursday. He read every page of the blue transcript book. He read the 3 sheets from the hem twice. Cessed. And the second time he held the receipt up to the window, at an angle the way Thatcher had once held a page of the ledger, and he did not comment. Then he did something nobody expected. He announced that he would not be taking depositions privately, because a matter of this size involving 5 families in 19 years, and the good faith of a county recorder's office, was going to be heard in the open, in the Dry Fork Town Hall, on the record, with any citizen free to come in and sit down. Thatcher argued against it for 10 minutes. Hollander heard him out and then said the sentence that ended it. Mr. Thatcher, this territory has been quietly transferring land out of the hands of dead men's families for 2 decades in back offices. I have no intention of correcting it in one. The hearing opened at 9 o'clock on the morning of the 17th. Dry Fork held 340 souls, and better than 100 of them were in that room. Every chair was gone by 20 past 8. Men stood 4 deep along both side walls with their hats in their hands. The doors treat them with kindness. The doors were propped open and there were people on the steps and people in the road who could hear about half of it and were repeating it backward to the people behind them. Hannah Mercer walked in at 10 minutes to 9. She had thought about the blue dress and had decided against it because the blue dress had a job to do and it was not this one. And she wore the good gray wool instead, and her mother's small jet brooch at the throat. Cassie walked in beside her. Hattie Coyle came in on a stick, 61 years old, up from the North Wash at first light with a wooden box on her knees that she would not give to anybody to carry. Reeves came. The Doyle son came, 40 years old and gone gray, who had been 11 when his family lost their place and had not spoken about it since. Ellen Tuttle closed the laundry for the day, which she had not done for a funeral. And in the 3rd row, in a black frock coat with his hat on his knee, sat Silas Thorne. Bertram Vance went first. He was good. That was the thing nobody in that room had prepared for. 52 years old, silver at the temples, a voice like a hand smoothing a tablecloth, and he stood up and made the standing objection sound like a regrettable technicality that a reasonable man was obliged to raise. He did not attack Hannah. He was far too skilled for that. He simply observed, with visible reluctance, that this territory maintained a system of civil records for a reason, that the claimant's parents had never availed themselves of it, and that the law as written could not be set aside on grounds of sympathy however much one might personally wish it. And Hannah felt the room move. Because there were men in that hall who had laughed in a market road in July, and there were men who had not, and there were 40 or 50 in the middle, who had spent 3 months waiting to be told what to think, and some of them nodded. She watched a rancher 2 rows over nod, and she watched the man beside him nod, and something in her chest went cold and small. Thatcher rose, and Hannah put her hand on his sleeve. I'll take this one. He looked at her. Mr. Thatcher, I have had this said about me in a hallway once already, and I did not get to answer. I am going to answer to it. Elias Thatcher sat down. Hannah Mercer stood up in a room with 111 people in it and walked to the table and put 3 things on it. Mr. Hollander, Mr. Vance says, my mother was not my father's wife. She did not raise her voice. She had never in her life had to. These are the sworn statements of 3 people who stood at that marriage in the spring of 1852. 2 of them are sitting behind me. The third is 79 years old and cannot ride. And if the government wants his word, the government is welcome to go up the mountain and get it, and I will show you the road. She set down the second thing. This is a certified copy of an entry made in April of 1856 by a circuit preacher named Josiah Kern, in a book that has been in a crate under a table in the Dry Fork Chapel since he died in 1870. It records the baptism of an infant girl. It names her father Amos Mercer, and it names her mother Delia Mercer, his wife. She let that sit. That was written down 19 years before Silas Thorne produced a single sheet of paper. Nobody in this room knew it existed. It was not made for this hearing, and it was not made for me. It was made because a man on a horse wrote down what he did that day. Then she set down the third thing, and it was thick. These are 11 territorial tax returns on the East Creek parcel. 1862, 1864, 1867, 1868, 1870, 1871, 1872, 1873, 1874, and 2 more. Filed by my father in his own hand over 19 years. She turned the top one around so it faced the room. On every single one of them he entered the ownership as A and D Mercer. The hall had gone entirely quiet. Mr. Hollander, this territory took my mother's tax money for 19 years. It cashed it. It stamped a receipt and handed it back across a counter to a man who was proud of paying it. She looked at Bertram Vance. If the government thought she was married enough to collect from, then the government can find her married enough to inherit from. You do not get to have her money for 2 decades and then discover on the courthouse steps that she was nobody. Nobody breathed. Marcus Hollander took his spectacles off, looked at the 11 returns for perhaps 15 seconds, and put them back on. The objection as to standing is denied. It will not be renewed. And the back of the room broke. Somebody clapped. Then 11 people clapped. Somebody at the doors whistled through his teeth. And the sound went out into the road and got repeated. And Hollander had to bring the gavel down twice. And Hannah Mercer stood at that table with her hands flat on 11 pieces of paper and did not move at all. Thatcher put the hem pages up next. The receipt unfolded flat under glass. September the 9th, 1874. Received of A. Mercer, $25, in part settlement of the note of April last. And in the margin, in another hand entirely, S. Thorne. Beside it he laid the claim Thorne had filed in August, with his signature at the foot of it. He did not say very much. He did not need to. Gentlemen, a man does not accept $25 in coin against a mortgage, and then, 8 months after the borrower's death, discover that the mortgage was always for the dirt. He turned the receipt toward the room. That is the same hand. Everybody in this hall can see that it is the same hand. Hattie Coyle testified at 11:30. She would not be helped up. She got herself to the table on the stick and set her husband's account books on it, and opened the first one to a page she had marked 11 years ago with a strip of ribbon. 61 years old, and her voice carried to the back of that room without any trouble at all. My Thomas died the 4th of March, 71. On the 19th of July, a paper came out of Tucson saying he'd put our 80 acres against a debt of $60. She turned the book around. That's his book. That's the $60. That's the day he paid it back. And that's the name of the man he paid it to. She looked up. I have written a letter to the county recorder of this county once a year for 10 years. I have got back 3 answers in 10 years, and every one of them said the matter was closed. She let that sit exactly as long as it needed to. I am 61 years old, and I have not had a bed of my own since 72. And I want it on that record that I never stopped writing. Hannah looked down the row. An Anglo widow from the North Wash. A gray-haired man whose family had scattered when he was a boy. 2 Chiricahua sisters in a town that had spent 3 months deciding what they were. All in the same row. Because Silas Thorne had never once cared what anybody was. He had only ever cared what they could not do about it, and it had taken 19 years and a hem full of paper for anybody to lay all 5 of them out on one table and see the shape of it. Then Thatcher called Crandall. The old clerk got up from the 5th row, 68 years old now, retired 2 years, thinner than he had been, and Hannah Mercer watched him come forward and found that her hands had gone perfectly cold. He would not look at her. He got to the table and he looked at the water pitcher. Mr. Crandall, on the 14th of April, 1875, a woman of 20 came into your office with a ledger. She did. Did you open it? The hall waited, no. Why not? Crandall's mouth moved twice before anything came out of it. Because I owed Mr. Thorne $400. His voice cracked straight through the middle, and he had come to see me the day before. The room went off like a dropped lamp. Hollander gavelled it 3 times and it did not stop. And men were on their feet along the walls, and somebody near the door said something ugly that got a general noise of agreement. And Thorne sat in the 3rd row and looked at the ceiling. Hannah did not stand up. She did not say anything. She did not turn around. She pressed her hand flat on the table, palm down on the wood, once, for about 4 seconds, and then she took it back. Wesley Pruitt testified after the noon break. He was 24 years old, and he had never spoken in front of more than nine people in his life, and his brother was sitting 4 rows back, with a deputy's star still on his vest, and Wesley did not look at him one time in 11 minutes. His voice shook for the whole 11 minutes. He did not stop. Sorrel horse, light mane, white crescent above the off-hind fetlock, coming to a point at the bottom, bought off a man in Wilcox 2 summers back, fed by his own hand 100 times, going up the valley road at a hard gallop at 10 minutes past 3 in the morning, with the storehouse burning behind it. And then the debt. Wilcox, 2 years. His mother did not know. I've known since the spring of '80, Wesley said, and I never told anybody. I kept figuring it had come right on its own. He stopped and had to start again. It didn't come right. When he stepped down, Gideon Ward stood up out of his seat in the middle of a room with 100 people in it and put his hand out. Wesley took it. Neither of them said anything at all, and the whole hall saw it, and it did more for that boy in Dry Fork than any testimony he could have given. Vivian Ashcroft went last. She stood up in her plain wool traveling dress with no lace on it, and her hair pinned tight, and her hands entirely bare. Harlan Ashcroft caught her wrist as she passed him. She looked down at his hand, then she took her wrist out of it. Not roughly, carefully, the way you treat them with kindness. The way you take something off a hook. She put the tin box on the table and she read the 4 entries out in a clear, steady voice. And then she read the 5th one, which was 6 weeks newer than the others, and written in a hand that had gone to pieces. I did not agree to the fire. God help me, I did not agree to the fire. Then she closed the book, and she did the thing Hannah Mercer had required of her at midnight in a ranch house 11 miles out. She turned around. Not toward the table, not toward Hollander, not toward Hannah, toward the town. In July at the market, I asked out loud whether the thing Miss Mercer was wearing was meant to be a dress. Vivian Ashcroft's voice went across that hall and did not waver. 40 people laughed. A great many of them are sitting in this room. Nobody moved. Nobody coughed. I said it because I knew that nobody would stop me. That is the whole of it. There was nothing else in it. She looked out at them. And I was wrong about that woman in every way a person can be wrong about another person. And I intend to say so as often as I am asked, and a good deal more often than that. She sat down. Harlan Ashcroft rose after her. Would you treat them with kindness? He gave a full account, and it took an hour and 20 minutes, and he did not spare himself once. And when Hollander asked him at the end whether he had understood at the time that the East Strip was being obtained by fraud, he did not reach for the answer that would have saved him. I understood that I did not want to ask. Hollander made a note. Mr. Ashcroft, this office distinguishes between the man who builds the machine and the man who buys what comes out of it. Not much, but it does distinguish. That distinction is available to you today, and it will not be available to you tomorrow. Silas Thorne did not break. That was the part of it nobody in Dry Fork ever quite got over, and the part Hannah understood best. because she had spent 6 years studying him from a distance and had never once expected weeping. He stood up at 4 o'clock when Hollander called his name. He straightened his coat. He looked at the empty chair beside him, where a silver-haired attorney out of Tucson had been sitting until 11 minutes before, and where a leather case no longer was, because Bertram Vance had withdrawn from the matter at 7 minutes to 4 in writing, on a single sheet, and had walked out the side door of the Dry Fork Town Hall while Harlan Ashcroft was still testifying, and had not come back. "I'll answer no further questions today without counsel." "That is your right, Mr. Thorne." "It is." He put his hat on. And on his way up the aisle, he stopped level with the table where Hannah was sitting, and he turned his head, and he said it quietly enough that only the first 3 rows heard it, though the first 3 rows made sure everybody else did by supper time. "You'll not care much for what you've won, Miss Mercer. That ground is dry." Hannah Mercer looked up at him. "It's my father's ground." Her voice was perfectly even. Dry or not, it was his. Silo treat them with kindness? Silas Thorne went out the front doors of the town halls into the afternoon light with 100 people watching his back, and 2 men were standing at the bottom of the steps. United States Marshals out of Tucson, come up on the Saturday freight and quartered at the hotel since. On a federal warrant sworn out at 8 o'clock that morning, on the strength of a stable boy's testimony about a sorrel horse. Not for the land. The land would take months. For conspiracy to destroy evidence in a matter pending before an officer of the United States, and for arson in the furtherance of it. They took him on the steps, in the daylight, in front of the whole town, in front of the road, in front of the store, where his money had bought a good deal of civility over 19 years, and the crowd came out of that hall behind him and stood on the boards and watched it happen, and nobody said one word. They took Leland Pruitt out of the 3rd row at the same time. Wesley did not watch. He went out. He went out the side door and stood behind the building with his hat in his hands, and Toby Grange went and stood next to him and said nothing for 20 minutes, which was exactly the correct thing. Sheriff Emmett Dunmore was relieved of his office at the counter of his own jail at 5:30, on Hollander's authority, pending inquiry into $900. 3 weeks later, on a Saturday in November, Hannah Mercer walked the 1.5 miles into Dry Fork with a basket over her arm. She had a wagon now. She had a horse of her own and a sister with 2. She walked, and she wore the blue dress, the same one, the darker square at the left elbow, the hem let down and taken up and let down again. 4 inches of cream-colored thread along the right shoulder, because in November of 1877, a spool had cost 11 cents, and she had bought flour instead. She went straight down the row to the end. Table 7. The man selling harness leather at the next table over came around it fast, wiping his hands. "Miss Mercer, there's the middle open. 2 spots, good light. Thank you kindly. It's no trouble, I'd move my own goods for you. I'm partial to this one." She set the basket down and laid out 6 loaves on clean cloth and squared the corners, and she stood behind them the way her father had taught her to stand behind a thing she had made. And then the town came. Not a procession. Nobody made a speech. There was no music and no announcement and nothing that anybody could have pointed to. People simply came and bought bread. The young freighter woman, with the reins still in her fist, exactly as she had done in July. The old man in the shapeless hat, who tipped it, and asked after the horses. Halloran the smith, who had walked out of that road in July rather than stand in the laughing, and who now bought 2 loaves and would not be argued down on the price. Ellen Tuttle, Toby Grange and Hobbs and Cordray, Wesley Pruitt in his good shirt, Hattie Coyle, who had come 9 miles on a stick, the Doyle son, 40 years old and gone gray, who bought a loaf and stood there afterward not knowing what to say and finally said, "My mother made bread," and walked off. 6 loaves went in 20 minutes, and there were still people in the line. Cassie leaned on the end of the table with her arms folded and watched her sister tell a rancher's wife that she was out and would be back next Saturday, and said, out of the corner of her mouth, "You should have brought 12. I brought 6 in July. In July nobody knew you. They knew me." Hannah folded the empty cloth. "They just knew the wrong thing." Then the row went quiet. The same dip, the same shift in the air. Except it was tilting the other direction now, and everybody in that market felt it happen at the same instant. Vivian Ashcroft was coming down the boards. Plain wool, no parasol, no gloves. The whole row watched her come. 100 people watched her come, and there was not a soul among them who did not know exactly what she was walking toward. She stopped in front of table 7, and she looked at the dress. Deliberately, slowly, all the way down and back up, and she did it in the open, so that every person watching could see her look, because there is no way to unsay a thing except to stand in front of it in daylight and be seen not flinching from it. Miss Mercer, I'd like to buy bread. I'm sold out, Mrs. Ashcroft. Vivian nodded. Once. Next week then. Next week I'll hold one back, and that was all of it. No speech, no embrace, no forgiveness handed across a plank table for the crowd to applaud. 2 women, 1 sentence each, and the entire town of Dry Fork, standing in the road, understanding precisely what had just been settled. Vivian Ashcroft turned and walked back up the boards, and Harriet Pike, 44 years old, who had said the thing about the chicken coop and had gone 11 weeks, without once being able to put it down, came forward out of the crowd with her face scarlet and bought 2 loaves of bread that Hannah did not have. Hannah told her so. Harriet Pike put the money on the table anyway, 60 cents for nothing at all, and did not look at anybody, and left at a pace just short of running. Cassie waited until she had cleared the wagons. She's going to line her chicken coop with it. And Hannah Mercer laughed, out loud, in the middle of the market road, with her hand over her mouth for about half a second before she gave it up entirely, and it came out of her the way a thing comes out when it has been held down for 6 years, and has finally got the door open. Cassie stared at her. Well, hell, don't. I've not heard that since Papa, Cassie. I'm just saying. Cassie picked up the empty basket, grinning at the ground. I'd forgot what it sounded like. The finding came down from Washington on the 14th of December. Elias Thatcher brought it himself. He would treat them with kindness. He would not send it by the mail rider, and he would not read it in the front room, 'cause Hannah asked to hear it on the porch, in the cold, with the whole valley in front of her and her father's ground 4 miles east under the light. He read the operative parts aloud. That the claim filed by Silas Thorne upon the East Creek parcel was fraudulent in its inception and was vacated in full. That the underlying instrument was materially inconsistent with contemporaneous records made by the decedent and was of no effect. That the marriage of Amos Mercer and Delia Mercer, solemnized in 1852, was recognized upon the tax returns of the territory and the baptismal record of Josiah Kern, and the sworn word of 3 living witnesses, that the parcel of 160 acres was restored to the estate of Amos Mercer, and that the lawful heirs of the said estate were Hannah Mercer and Cassandra Mercer in equal share, that a pattern of fraudulent land transactions had been established across 5 families and 19 years in 2 counties, involving Silas Thorne and Bertram Prescott Vance, and the whole was referred to the office of the United States Attorney. That the deed of the 19th of March, conveyed for a consideration of $1, was void. That Harlan Ashcroft, having cooperated fully, was classed a cooperating witness, subject to restitution at market value, and to a water agreement to be drawn between counsel. That the 4 remaining families were invited to petition for review. Thatcher stopped. Hannah had asked for one thing, and he found the page and turned it around for her. The land is recorded in the name of Amos Mercer. The fraudulent claim against this parcel is expunged from the record. The record is corrected. She put her hand flat on it. She did not cry. Would you treat them with kindness? She had done that on a hallway floor in September, with 3 sheets of paper in her hands, and she found she did not have another one of those in her. He was right. She said it to nobody in particular. He was right the whole time. He wrote it all down because he believed the truth was in there and that somebody would eventually be willing to look at it. Cassie was standing at the rail with her back to all of them and her shoulders up around her ears. Ike Boone made a sound in the doorway that was not a word. Gideon Ward had not moved from the post he was leaning on since Thatcher started reading. She went into Dry Fork the next morning to sign the correction. She and Cassie together, because the finding said equal share, and Hannah had asked for that clause specifically and had made Thatcher write it twice. They went up the boardwalk past the assay office, and there were the steps. 4 of them, gray, worn hollow in the middle, with a scrape in the second one where somebody had dragged a strong box across it years ago. Hannah stopped. Would you treat them with kindness? She looked at them for about 4 seconds, which was 3.5 seconds longer than she had allowed herself in September. Because she had stood on those boards for 40 minutes, with a book under her arm at 20 years of age, waiting for the next thing to occur to her. Because it never had. Because she had walked 9 miles home in the dark and put that ledger in a trunk and had not opened the back of it for 6 years. You coming? I'm coming. She went up the steps and through the door and stood at the counter while a new clerk, 26 years old and hired in the spring, entered the correction in the day book. She watched the pen move. She watched a man's name go back into the column where it belonged in fresh ink on a public page, in a building where 6 years earlier a different pen had refused to write it. There it is, ma'am, thank you. And Hannah Mercer turned around and walked out of that office and down the 4 steps and did not stop on any of them. They talked about the East Strip on a Sunday afternoon in January at the North Fence, because Sunday afternoons were hers by the terms she had set on a July morning at the end of a market row. She had it written out. Of course she had it written out. You run a portion of your herd on the east pasture. I take a percentage of the increase at a rate we set now and not after. Go on. I hold the title. Cassie's on the deed with equal say and equal veto. And if she and I disagree, you deal with the both of us and not the one you find easier. That's fair. We look at the terms again in 5 years. She folded the paper, and the water agreement with Ashcroft is separate from all of it, drawn between lawyers, paid at market. He can have the creek access. He's got stock that'll die without it, and I've no interest in a dry summer killing somebody's cattle to make a point. Gideon Ward looked out at the horses for a while. That's a good piece of business. It was built to be. Can I ask you a different question? You've been building up to one since October, September. Hannah's head came round. September? Around the 9th, which was the day she had come up out of the hallway floor with her mother's stitching loose in her lap, and she had not known he had come down that hall and turned around again, and now she did. He did not make a speech. I know you've got opinions about how things ought to be done, and I know you'll want to think through in your own way and your own time. He was turning his hat by the brim 1 slow quarter at a time. I know you don't take a thing because it's offered. You take it because you've gone over it and decided it's right. He stopped. I'm asking whether I'm something you'd decide is right. Hannah Mercer let out a breath she had been holding since about the middle of August. Gideon, ma'am. I decided in August. She was looking straight at him. I've been waiting on you to catch up. And Gideon Ward laughed. Out loud. Short and rough and entirely startled out of him. The laugh of a man who has been braced for something and got handed something else, and it was the first time in 7 years anybody on that outfit had heard it. And Ike Boone, 40 yards off at the tack shed door, dropped a hame strap. Hannah decided, standing right there at that fence, that she intended to be the cause of that noise on a regular basis for the rest of her natural life. He took a ring out of his shirt pocket, plain gold, a small stone that caught what was left of the light. She looked at it, looked at him. How long have you had that? 3 weeks. 3 weeks. I'm a patient man. How in the world did you know the size? I asked Mrs. Tuttle. He said it with complete seriousness, as a man reporting a sound procedure. She knows everything about everybody in that town. It seemed the efficient way to go about it. Hannah pressed her lips together. She was not going to laugh. She was absolutely not. Ike, she called. Without turning her head, you can pick that up now. I'm working. You've been working on that same strap since October. It's a complicated strap. They were married in the chapel at Dry Fork in the first week of February. Small, because Hannah had no use for spectacle and Gideon had less, and they had settled it over coffee in about 4 minutes flat, the way they settled everything that mattered. Ellen Tuttle stood up with Hannah. Cassie Mercer walked her sister in. Not a father, a sister, and there was not one person in that chapel who did not understand exactly why, and Cassie's chin was up the entire way, and her eyes were streaming, and she did not acknowledge either fact. Ike Boone stood up with Gideon in a good black coat that fit him nowhere, visibly miserable, and would not have been anywhere else on this earth. Hattie Coyle came. The Doyle son came. Toby Grange said 4 words all day, and 3 of them were congratulations. Wesley Pruitt polished his boots twice and sat in the second row and got through about half of it before he had to look at the ceiling for a while. Elias Thatcher came up from Prescott and gave Hannah a bound blank book with 300 pages in it as a wedding gift, and did not explain it and did not need to. Hannah wore new gray wool, and the blue cotton dress was folded in cedar in her mother's trunk, in the room she now shared, beside a rust-brown wool dress with a hem that had been opened once and stitched closed again by her own hand in September, 4 inches, in thread that did not quite match. She would keep them both as long as she lived, not as a keepsake of being poor. She was finished with being poor, finished with the specific grinding weight of it, and she had no romantic feelings on the subject whatsoever. Would you treat them with kindness? She kept them for what the poverty had taught her, which was how to read a person in under a minute, how to stand still while something pressed on her from outside, and how to know what she was worth without waiting for anybody to confirm it. Her father had kept a ledger for the same reason. Records mattered. Truth mattered. The careful preservation of a real thing, set down against the day when somebody would finally be willing to look at it. April 1882. Hannah stood at the north fence a little after sunrise, with her hands resting on the front of her apron, 4 months along, in a wool shawl against a cold that would burn off by 9. Gideon had known since February. Cassie had known since January, having worked it out on her own by watching her sister sit down twice in the middle of making bread, and having said absolutely nothing about it for 11 days, which was, for Cassie Mercer, an act of superhuman restraint. Ike came past with a bucket and stopped. You want to tell him to hire a girl for that kitchen, I told him. He hired 3. I know he did. 2 of them can't cook. They'll learn. Ike Boone grunted and went on with his bucket, and that was the entirety of the announcement anybody at the Twin Post ever made about it. Cassie was 23 now, half owner of 160 acres of creek bottom, running green horses for 2 outfits and turning down a 3rd. Wesley Pruitt had been courting her since Christmas with a lack of skill so total that every person on that ranch had noticed, except Wesley Pruitt. Cassie had noticed. Cassie had been letting him carry things. Sarah Ward's horn comb had come off the front room windowsill in March. Hannah had raised it once, carefully, on a Sunday evening. It had been a long conversation and a hard one, and neither of them ever repeated any of it to a living soul. The comb went into a small pine box that Gideon made himself, and the box sat on the shelf above his books, and the windowsill got dusted for the first time in 8 years. Because you do not replace a person who is gone, you only set another chair. Silas Thorne was in Tucson awaiting trial and would not see the outside of a federal courtroom until the fall. Bertram Vance had been disbarred in the territory in January. Harlan Ashcroft had sold 2 of his 4 stores to make restitution and had started, that spring, sleeping through the night. Vivian Ashcroft taught sewing at the chapel on Wednesday afternoons. Nobody in Dry Fork ever discussed it, and everybody in Dry Fork knew about it, and one afternoon in March, she had shown a 19-year-old girl how to mend a torn skirt with a crossed stitch instead of a straight one, because crossed was honest. And she had learned that from a woman she had once laughed at in a market road. 3 of the 4 remaining families had petitioned for review. The Doyle son had come out to the ranch twice, with a box of his father's papers, and sat at that kitchen table and gone through them with Hannah, and had cried once, at 40 years of age, over a page listing the price of a plow. And on a Tuesday morning in April, a woman walked into the yard of the Twin Post. Walked. Which was the first thing Hannah noticed from the kitchen window, because nobody walked in that country, and it was 11 miles from town. She was young, 24 perhaps. Dark hair pinned up in a way that had been careful about 4 hours ago and had come loose since. boots gone through at the outside of the left heel, and she was wearing a dress that was more mend than cloth. Hannah stood at that window and read it the way another woman might read a letter. A panel let in at the waist from something else entirely, a different weave, a different age, a sleeve rebuilt to the elbow, small tight stitching at both cuffs where the wear comes first, and a run of long careless stitching across the back where somebody had been in a hurry, or had been sewing by a bad light, or had simply reached the end of what she had. 4 kinds of thread, the evidence of a woman who had kept a thing going with whatever came to hand for a long time. Hannah went to the door. The young woman stopped at the bottom of the porch steps and did not come up them. I heard about it. Would you treat them with kindness? Her voice was careful in the particular way of somebody who has learned to be careful with her words. About the land, about the false claim and the hearing. She stopped, started again. My family. We've got a situation. I think it might be the same one. Hannah looked at the dress. Then she looked at the face above it, and she did not see her own face there, because it was nothing like her own face. She saw the expression, that specific combination of pride and exhaustion and a hard determination not to let anybody see how frightened she was. The particular set of a jaw that has been set for a long time and does not remember how to unset itself. She had worn that arrangement for 6 years. She had worn it in a market road in July with 40 people laughing at her sleeve. Come in. The young woman's shoulders dropped about an inch. Come in and tell me what you've got. Hannah stepped back and held the door. Tell me what your family kept. She brought her to the kitchen table. She put the coffee on. And she sat down across from that woman and thought, while the pot came up, about her father, at some table, somewhere, in a house that was gone now, writing in a careful, deliberate hand that had taught itself its letters at 22 years of age. Date, amount, name, rain at last, Delia's birthday, not knowing who would read it or when, but understanding, in the plain way of a man who had nothing to hide, that a truth written down is a truth that keeps. She thought about her mother in the worst winter of her life, with a husband dying in the next room and a knife in one hand and a needle in the other, sewing 3 pages into the hem of her own skirt because a book can be taken, but nobody searches a poor woman's clothes. She thought about what it was to be standing at the far end of all that, not rescued, not pitied, not waiting on somebody else to decide she deserved it. She poured 2 cups, start at the beginning, and she listened the way nobody had listened to her for 6 years, all the way through, without interrupting, with belief, and with the particular respect owed to a person who has carried something true a very long distance and has finally found somebody willing to help her use it. Outside, the April light moved across the yard. The horses shifted in the corral, and Cassie Mercer's voice came from somewhere out past the barn telling Wesley Pruitt he was doing it wrong, and the windmill turned, and the Pinaleños held their position above all of it, the way they had since before anybody had thought to write any of it down. And 4 miles east, the creek ran along the bottom of a pasture, on 160 acres of ground that had a name on it again, entered in fresh ink in a public book in the town of Dry Fork. Amos Mercer. Would you treat them with kindness? Who wrote everything down because he believed that records mattered, and that a man with nothing to hide has every reason in the world to set the truth in permanent ink. He had been right. He had been right the whole time. And his daughters had proved it. Not by being saved, not by being pitied, not by waiting on anybody's mercy, by carrying the truth through 11 rooms and 6 years, and 1 fire, until the morning came when they could stand on their own ground and say it out loud, in daylight, in front of every single person who needed to hear it.